Chapter 29:57. Her eyes were clear and charming, and her face was absolutely beautiful. "Monk, save me." She stretched out her beautiful fingers and beckoned him. Ning Chun was in a trance. He found himself reaching out, holding her fingers, and then gently placing them on his lips. Soft and fragrant, like flames and snow, the feeling of alternating hot and cold made his body tremble. It was just an extremely unfamiliar feeling. It was the first time he had tasted it. Ning Chun came back to his senses, only to find that the little minx had stopped what she was doing and was staring at him blankly. He looked down in panic and saw that he was holding her hand. Then he put his lips on the back of her hand. His moist, thin lips printed on the girl's white and tender skin. He quickly let go, and his heart suddenly beat faster. A trace of embarrassment appeared on his usually cold face, and panic appeared in his dead eyes. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a long time, then suddenly smiled. "Monk, I've calmed down. Thank you for your spiritual energy to help me pass through the berserk period. You're really a kind and compassionate Buddha." After saying that, she immediately retreated. The cold water slid over her body, and her black hair scattered on the clear water. The beautiful girl lazily reached out and grabbed a lotus, then hid behind it. Only her snow-white back was exposed. Her voice was soft. "Monk, you can go now." The fluctuation of spiritual energy calmed down for a while. She leaned on the flower and slowly held the lotus leaves with her fingers. She seemed to be a little worried. Suddenly, a hand lightly fell on her shoulder. The girl seemed to be unprepared. She blankly turned her head, only to see that the young man had already come to her side. His expression was still cold, but there was a trace of forbearance in his handsome face. He looked at the tears in her eyes. "Why are you crying?" His voice was somewhat blank. The young man, who had always been indifferent to everything in the world, seemed to have encountered such a situation for the first time. Why was she crying? This question seemed to be more important than becoming a Buddha. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Suddenly, her tears turned into laughter. She lowered her head and rubbed her eyes. While rubbing, she said, "Monk, you make me so happy." Ning Chun lowers his eyes and keeps quiet for a while. He seems to be puzzled by her crying and laughing at the same time. She reached out and gave him a push. "You should leave. You are a Buddhist cultivator. I only touched you when I was in my berserk state and touched your Buddhist heart. I won't do it again." In the end, there were only 3 words. He softened his voice, carrying obvious sadness. Ning Chun stared at her for a while. He couldn't help but reach out his hand to touch the tears on her face. However, he found that what he touched was a lotus. It was a beautiful and delicate lotus flower. The little lotus stretched out its leaves and covered its face. It said in a tender voice, "Monk, you can go. I'm fine now. Don't worry." Ning Chun soaked in the water, exposing his fair shoulders. Water droplets slid down his flawless skin and fell into the water. He looked at her for a while. Then, he slowly pulled his clothes out of the water and turned around with his body covered in water vapor. He was just about to leave. Then he heard the little lotus say, "I'll listen to you chanting again tomorrow." Ning Chun lowered his head, not saying anything. Only then did he leave. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. Sora was stunned by the favorable impression points. 55. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her leaves and stroked her painted face. The little bald donkey is beginning to know what a woman is, so his emotions are exploding. He had always regarded her as a demoness who was neither male nor female. Even if his favorability increased, he didn't realize what kind of emotion it was. Chapter 29:58. After so long, she finally made him realize what a woman was. She was a tiger little monk. Wei Wei Bai covered her lotus face and giggled. "I'm really a disaster." The system was changing his clothes expressionlessly. After all, his body was too small, so he couldn't wear a lot of clothes. He felt that he could grow up quickly in the future. It didn't matter if the clothes were too big. But after the divinity ran out to do evil, he realized that he might not grow up so easily. because he had to store his strength now. To help the human male lead suppress the divinity, at least until the host could live a long life. So for a long time he estimated that he would look like a 4 or 5-year-old. The system heard the host's words and nodded in agreement. You're so beautiful that the world is moved. The old tortoise flips over. The bald donkey kneels down. When the little lotus fairy heard it, she immediately looked up at the plate and suddenly felt that she was the most beautiful person in the world. Although your tone of praise is emotionless, but it just sounds good. The system said, when you're a woman, does that mean his favorability will increase? And his favorability points will increase every day? Wei Wei Bai shook her lotus leaf. It still depends on the pace of the strategy. Anyway, the strategy time is still pending, so I'll drag it out as long as I can. The system was confused. The host wanted to drag it out and didn't want to leave. Could it be that she liked honest monk? In the end, he saw Wei Wei by holding her lotus face and looking at the hazy water surface. I'm the most beautiful person in this world. If I don't look at it for a few more years, I'll lose money. The system was speechless. Okay, he continued to change the clothes. The host was too mature, her heart was strong, her ability was strong, and she was at the peak of the king. As a system, he was relieved. Wei Wei Bai was a woman of her words. She said that she wouldn't flirt, so she wouldn't. When she came to listen to the chanting the next day, she sat on the scripture with a serious face. The young man sat on the chair and put his fingers on the table. His beautiful fingertips were only a few inches away from the little fairy. But she was expressionless. With her arms crossed in front of her chest, she listened to him seriously. Unlike in the past, she would run over and rub his fingers from time to time. Sometimes it was too sticky. He even used the alms bowl to hold her down. Today, he had already placed the alms bowl on one side of the table. He planned to do what she did yesterday and hold it in place so that she could calm down for a few days. Last night, he sat on the futon and chanted scriptures the entire night. He also spent the whole night counting the prayer beads. He thought of her demonic frenzy, and then silently used all his strength to suppress the dark hell. She was afraid that the aura of the dark hell would transform into her appearance. To tempt him, in the past, he was confident that he could suppress the aura of darkness. After all, what was fake would always be fake. Last night, for the first time, he didn't allow any dark aura to appear. He seemed to be afraid of something. Love, hate, fear. He was born with the Buddha bone, so he was unfamiliar with these emotional fluctuations. Ever since he was young, he had always felt that the world was empty. Everything in the world is like water in his eyes. With a sweep, there was no trace left behind. But yesterday, when she was lying on top of him, her soft and fragrant body had broken the peaceful feeling he had for so many years. It was like a hurricane had swept past. He was at a loss for the entire night. He thought that she would still be as unforgiving as she was in the past. Ning Chun glanced at the little demoness. He realized that she was really serious and listening to the scriptures. Today's scripture class was very smooth, so he deliberately slowed down his speed of speech. Quick to read at https://www.sashu.com. Quick to read on your phone. https://m sashu.com. Quick, comma. Chapter 2959. The little demon also asked a few questions about the scriptures, and it could be seen that she was listening carefully. In the end, it took a long time. The sun was about to set. Ning Chun stopped the lecture and glanced at her indifferently. He opened his thin lips and asked hesitantly, "Is there anything else you don't understand?" Wei Wei Bai jumped up and patted her delicate lotus skirt. "Isn't it just the same old tune? It's to calm the mind. I understand." Ning Chen's lips trembled, but he didn't say anything. The little demon was still walking around the scriptures and said, "You're right. I figured it out last night. I should learn from the old turtle. I should learn to be a holy object and live as long as the heavens and the earth." Ning Chun looked at her silently, and his fair face was a little stunned. Wei Wei Bai jumped off the table and landed lightly. Then she waved her hand. Then I'll go and talk to the old turtle at the back of the mountain. After all, he's a senior. She didn't take many steps. Suddenly, she was picked up by someone. In front of her was the young man's enlarged face. His eyebrows were delicate, and the cinnabar color in his eyes was like flowing flames. It was unusually gorgeous. Ning Chun looked at her indifferently for a while before lowering his eyes to hide the emotions in his dark eyes. It's too late today. The old turtle is asleep. The little demon smiled indifferently. Since the old turtle is asleep, I'll go to sleep too. I'll come to your lecture tomorrow. If you have nothing to do, you should work hard to cultivate. Ning Chen's eyes were deep, and he didn't say anything. The little demon at his fingertips was already shaking, trying to break free from his strength. Okay, monk, I'm leaving. Let go of me. Ning Chun raised his eyes slightly. His eyes were a little blank, and there was a trace of helplessness. He seemed to feel that Wei Wei Bai was not clingy today. It was a little hard, but this was what he wanted. He wanted her to cultivate well and not cling to him. Wei Wei Bai was still struggling, but she found that Ning Chun walked to the bed and put her on the quilt. Wei Wei Bai looked up at him blankly. Her delicate little face was full of tension and confusion. Monk, what do you want to do? I didn't do anything today, and I made the most profound confession. I swear to study hard. Today it was indeed the best day he had ever done. Ning Chun thought about it. He didn't do anything wrong. He was silent for a while and then he said softly, "You can sleep here." Bai Weiwei stared blankly, but she didn't appreciate his kindness. Instead, she giggled, "No need, monk. I'm sleeping. Where are you going to sleep? After all, you have to guard your body like jade. How can I defile the place where you sleep?" Even the honest man felt that something was amiss. Ning Chen's eyes became a little obscure. After thinking for a while, he took out a mirror from his sleeve. It was the mirror he had confiscated earlier. The mirror became very small in his fingertips. Then, he handed over the small mirror. That Lu Chen. Ning Chun hesitated and was about to take back the mirror. But he found that the demon rushed over and took the mirror away. Then she looked down at the mirror. "All right, since you're so sincere, I'll reluctantly accept it." Ning Chen's fingers were stiff in the air. Then he stretched out his hand and spread the bedding. Then he thought of something and put the futon under the bed. It was a clean place. He sat cross-legged on the futon with an indifferent expression and a calm tone. "You sleep on the bed. I will meditate and rest. The spiritual aura in the spiritual pool is too strong. It is not easy for you to cultivate. You can rest in this meditation room when you are tired. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click on You Can See It when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like." Chapter 2960. The little demoness didn't care about what he said at all. She was looking at herself in the mirror with her head lowered. Her response was very perfunctory. "Got it. Whatever." Ning Chun was relieved to see that she had returned to her original self. He thought that she had lost all her worldly desires. Thinking of this, he paused. Didn't he want her to be like this? How could he be happy that she was still evil? For the first time, Ning Chun didn't want to think about it. He pursed his lips and closed his eyes to recite the sutra. Suddenly, a hand, soft and fragrant, caressed his face. "Monk, do you want me?" she murmured softly. Ning Chen's eyelashes fluttered and he immediately opened his eyes, only to see that he had returned to the spiritual pool. In the sky full of lotus flowers, the girl's back was facing him. Her back was bare. She turned her head and smiled, charming all living things. She stretched out her fingertips as if she wanted to touch him. Ning Chen's face turned cold. He immediately waved his prayer beads and shattered the illusion. Sure enough, he was back in the Zen room. He slowly relaxed. However, he saw the little Wei Wei Bai lying on the bed and calling him with a puzzled expression. "Monk, what's wrong with you? You didn't respond. Did you fall asleep?" Ning Chun quietly stared at her for a while before confirming that it was real. He gently shook his head and was about to say something. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai frowning. "Monk, Will your dark aura run out? Ning Chun pursed his thin lips and nodded. Occasionally. I will try my best to suppress it. The little demoness supported her chin with both hands and asked curiously, Does your dark aura reflect your inner thoughts? Ning Chen's expression turned serious. Did she call out her name just now? She shouldn't have. He wasn't born yet. He was silent for a while before saying slowly, Occasionally, it will reflect my inner thoughts, and then it will be magnified into an illusion. The little demoness nodded and then pointed behind him. Is that also an illusion of your dark aura? Ning Chen's pupils shrank. Behind? He immediately turned around and saw a beautiful figure sitting on the table. Her beautiful and smooth back and fair skin made the woman turn her head slightly, her lips curling into a mocking smile. Then, she said in a low voice, Monk, the gap in your heart has become bigger. You can actually miss some of us when you destroy us. Ha ha ha. That woman's face was Wei Wei Bai's. Ning Chun immediately came back to his senses. Just now, he was in a trance, shattering the illusion. However, he missed out on a few strands of dark energy. He let it escape outside. With a flick of Ning Chen's finger, the naked woman shattered. Then, he almost didn't dare to turn around and held his breath. Finally, he heard the question he didn't want to hear the most. Monk, is your hallucination me without any clothes on? The little fairy's voice was soft and innocent, as if she really didn't know anything. Ning Chen. He lowered his head nervously and did not explain anything. After all, that was the truth. The obsession in his heart had transformed into something. It was just that filthy. Suddenly, he heard Wei Wei Bai say lazily, Monk, I want to sleep, but my body is too small and the blanket is too big. It's not convenient for me to sleep. Can you unseal me and give me the Buddha beads? Ning Chun had never thought of taking away her Buddha beads. He was just suppressing her for a while to prevent her from acting too recklessly. He didn't hesitate and threw the Buddha beads away. He didn't even turn around. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would remember what he had imagined again. He meditated silently and chanted the heart-cleansing sutra to suppress the darkness in his heart. Suddenly, a pair of hands hugged his waist. The girl pressed her face against his shoulder and whispered, Monk, instead of looking at such an ugly thing, why don't you look at me? I'm the real person. Ning Chun thought that she was really going to cultivate and suppressed her temper. He didn't expect that after giving her the Buddha beads, she would still be so clingy. Ning Chun lowered his head silently. His fingers that were holding the Buddha beads were slightly pale. He was about to leave her. However, he found that his surroundings were clear. The dark energy around him was absorbed and purified by the girl behind him. Her breathing was a little difficult. She hugged his hand a little harder and her fingers were trembling. After purifying all the overflowing dark energy in one go, the girl let go of him. Her voice was indifferent. Don't force yourself in the future. If you feel uncomfortable, just tell me. I'll help you. After saying that, she left and returned to the bed. Ning Chun looked down at the Buddha beads on his fingers. After a long time, he gently turned his head. However, he saw that the girl was already curled up. Her face was pale and she was hiding in the bedding. Her eyes were closed and she was sleeping quietly. She had used up too much energy and was sleeping soundly. She wasn't like her usual self at all, thinking of ways to disturb him. Ning Chun stared at her for a while. Then, he got up and walked to the bedside. He reached out his fair fingers and wanted to touch her. However, his fingertips stopped at the last moment. He hesitated for a while before pulling her blanket and covering her more tightly. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 60. Chapter 2961. The days of chanting were slow and leisurely. The little lotus fairy really stopped fooling around. Every day, she would sit obediently on his desk. Sometimes the little girl would lie on his scripture book and read. Sometimes, she would lie on the book and recite the scriptures with her eyes closed. Every month, when he held a Dharma assembly, she would lie on his hand and go with him. The lotus flowers in the spiritual pond were always blooming. None of them were as pretty as the little lotus fairy. She would only hug the prayer beads he gave her at night and quietly absorb the power. Her clinginess disappeared after she lost control during the berserk period. She was much quieter now. Ning Chun glanced sideways and quietly sized her up. There were a few more candles in the meditation room, making it brighter. Wei Wei Bai's small body leaned against the prayer beads. Her white and tender fingers touched the prayer beads. She put her face on the prayer beads and squinted her eyes slightly. She was absorbing the power. Now she could freely control her size. She seemed to know that she could charm people when she grew bigger. So most of the time, even if she could grow bigger, she would still maintain this small figure. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. Her eyes were clear and there was a golden glow in them. She slowly looked up, as if she sensed his peeping gaze. She looked at him with a softer gaze. "Monk, if you like to look at me, then look at me openly. Don't hide it. You asked me to chant the scriptures to clear my mind, but you're the one who's obsessed." Wei Wei Bai smiled. Ning Chun silently looked away. After a long silence, he said softly, "It's my fault for having too much obsession." He didn't deny it, but he didn't say in detail what obsession he had. Wei Wei Bai sat up with the prayer beads in her arms. "If there's too much dark energy, tell me. I'll help you purify it. You raised me so big. Isn't it because of my purifying power?" The monk valued her so much from the beginning. He probably felt that her purifying power was being used. Otherwise, he wouldn't ask her to chant scriptures every day. After all, she was stronger and her mind was purer. She had embarked on the path of biological cultivation. Then, her purifying power would only be stronger. She could help him even more. "You raised me to this age." Ning Chen's expression was calm. His fingers gently pinched the Buddha beads. He lowered his eyelashes and said in a faint voice, "Don't force yourself. You should focus on cultivation now." He could control himself. With such thoughts in mind, he suddenly felt something slowly creeping up his leg. He coldly lowered his head and saw the pale woman reveal a stunning and strange smile. She slowly opened her mouth, as if she was about to say something seductive. She looked at the face that looked like Wei Wei Bai. Ning Chun moved his finger. A Buddhist bead flew down from the string of beads. He quietly shattered the illusion. He watched as the illusion shattered into pieces and disappeared completely. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. Then he looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai leaning on the edge of the table. She seemed to want to see what was going on. He was speechless for a moment. Then he reached out his fingers and gently pressed her head, slowly pushing her back. "Nothing." His voice was calm. It was as if nothing had happened. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with both hands and leaned on the table. She revealed a smile. "Monk, if you feel uncomfortable anywhere, remember to tell me. I'll help you purify it." Ning Chun looked up and pursed his thin lips. Then his voice softened a little. "You're cultivating now. You don't have to worry about me." Wei Wei Bai snorted softly with a childish nasal voice. Then, she obediently leaned on the scripture book and read the scriptures. Seeing that she didn't suspect anything, Ning Chun heaved a sigh of relief and began to count the beads. He counted only a few. Suddenly, she looked up in realization. Then, she smiled and said, "Monk, you're old enough. Sometimes it's not because of obsession but because of the body. After all, young people are full of vigor and vitality. They can't control it. Don't be mean." Ning Chen, you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf, if you like. Chapter 2962. Then, he finally understood the meaning of this sentence. His face turned slightly red. He took out a small wooden hammer and tapped her head lightly. "Nonsense. Cultivate properly." The little lotus fairy glared at him and began to read the scriptures again, ignoring him. Ning Chun looked at her silently for a while before lowering his eyes. Did he tap her head too hard? Was she angry again? At dinner time, there were a few plates of small pastries in the light meal. They were all very cute. The pastries were pink and red, light green and light green. They were all made with different ingredients. They were full of spiritual energy. It should be because they picked rare plants to have such an effect. These plates of pastries were placed in front of Wei Bai. Ning Chun ate expressionlessly and didn't specifically ask her to eat. Wei Bai also sat expressionlessly beside the big plate, holding a small rice ball and gnawing on it. The lotus fairy didn't need to eat. It was enough to eat spiritual energy. But she was still a human, she still had a desire to eat. So she never wronged herself. If the target ate, she would eat as well. But she turned a blind eye to the pastries that Ning Chun placed beside her. Ning Chun lowered his eyes dark, with a trace of inquiry. Why didn't she eat? Didn't she like it very much? Or did she not like it after a few days? This kind of thought lightly swept through his heart, but he restrained the urge to ask. He just casually reached out and pushed the plate closer to Wei Bai. The little fairy looked up, a trace of doubt appearing on her beautiful face. Monk, didn't you want to eat this thing yourself? Ning Chun was silent for a while, then slowly looked at her. I don't eat this. Wei Bai took a bite of the rice ball and said slowly, if you don't eat, why did you spend so much effort to pick the spiritual herbs? Ning Chen's fingers that were holding the chopsticks paused, his cold eyes staring at her for a while, then slowly said, my body is stiff. I went out to exercise. After Wei Bai finished eating the small rice ball, she clapped her hands and took out a special small spoon. Then, she scooped up a spoonful of pastry and began to eat. She said as she ate, just say that you're cooking for me. Why are you so shy? You're starting to be dishonest too. You're the one who's talking nonsense, but you're the one who can't do it. You're the one who's blabbering nonsense. Ning Chun silently took out 2 pieces of earplugs and stuffed them into his ears. Today was another day of the little lotus fairy's nagging. Why was a plant spirit so talkative? Ning Chun found it strange and continued to eat. With the help of the mirror, Wei Bai was no longer in a hurry to complete the mission. Before she went to bed, she would always take out the mirror and look at it again and again. Her face was too beautiful. The more he read, the more refreshed he felt. The world was beautiful, his mood was good, and his thoughts and morals had all improved. The system was sewing a pair of shoes for itself while chatting with the host. Little Biao is so pitiful. It goes to the mine every day to mine for alien minerals. When those foremen see that it can't do it, they even whip it. Sigh, it's really refreshing. Ha ha ha. The host was also holding the mirror. It sounds so pitiful. His temper has improved a lot recently. It's not good to gloat. The system said, don't sympathize with it. It was promoted from a civilian system. These kinds of systems usually have a problem, which is that they're especially ruthless. That's why they can get rid of so many systems and get the mission. It's a fat job with power. It wasn't him who said that. It was just the missions. The system and the host would have to bribe it if they had some connections. // Chapter 2963. Although the side quest could be rejected, but some special big quests could not be rejected. Some systems would bribe the host in advance to protect their performance. Otherwise, how could the side quest bear his debt, pay off half of it, and get the bank's debt repayment delay certificate? But half of it was the limit. He could only mine for the rest of his life to repay the daily bank interest. If he did not pay it back, he would be struck by lightning. Delete it. Wei Bai looked at her face. Even a saint could see it. She had such beauty and suddenly felt that the world was so beautiful and cute. She should also have a kind heart and give the side quest some verbal pity. Wei Bai, what a poor little thing. After all, mining is hard work. We are all commoners like you. Don't dislike each other. They were all poor commoners. Who was better than who? Her family's Tongzi could not even buy a house. He was so stingy when it came to eating snacks. Now that she had life points, it was right to give him more to buy food. But even if he was full, he still could not marry a female Tongzi without a house. The system was just about to popularize the side quest's heartless black-hearted heart, so that its pure host would not be deceived. Ding! Random side quest activated. A familiar voice. Dear little baby, today is another day of loving you. I will miss you to death if I don't see you. Miss you to death. I still miss you to death. The words were the same, but the meaning was very different. But random quests were all small quests. So the system and the host were still making shoes and looking in the mirror. Host, please do your part as a goblin. Part? What part? Seducing people? The goblins of this plane like to eat people and harm people to strengthen their own growth. You have to be strong, goblin host. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, her eyes turned cold and she immediately became vigilant. It did not feel like a small quest. As expected. Host, please absorb the essence of 100 people. Before the main quest of this plane is completed, complete the side quest together. Punishment. Disfigurement of the face, disfigurement of the soul, the system's entire family and the host's entire family, including their ancestral graves, will be dug out and disfigured. In a distant alien planet, the side quest sends a wonderful blessing. Remark. I want your whole family to go to the bridge of helplessness to scare the other party. Reincarnate in an orderly manner and then be scared to death. After death, go to the bridge of helplessness again to scare the other party. Endless generations of ancestors and descendants, each generation scaring people to death. Wei Wei Bai held the mirror. The system who was sewing the shoes was speechless. Then, Wei Wei Bai touched her face and silently put down the mirror. The system looked at the little shoe in its hand and silently put down the needle. Wei Wei Bai finally sighed. Tong Shou, you're right. What a vicious and merciless trash Tong Shou. Whipping it while it's mining is too easy on it. We should pour chili water into its butt. The system sighed faintly. I told you. That guy is not a good person. We don't have any deep grudges with it, and we're even friendly with it. How could it be so deranged to such an extent? The chili pepper water is too kind. We fed it molten iron to wake it up. The system and the host both showed a friendly and gloomy expression to the distant side quest, to give it a wonderful blessing of being formatted every day and being fed molten iron every day. Wei Wei Bai put down the mirror and stared blankly at a certain spot. She had already grown up. Lying in bed, there was a hint of melancholy on her white and tender face. Sitting by the bed, Ning Chun, who was sitting on the cattail hassock, faintly raised his eyes and looked at her for a while. Then, he asked softly, What's wrong? Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2964. Wei Wei Bai turned her head and sized him up in a daze. Then, she hesitated and frowned. Monk, do you think that most of the demons are harming people? Ning Chen's expression was indifferent. Yes, most of them are. Because of the berserk period, the essence of humans is also what demons need. Many demons will choose to absorb essence to survive, or eat humans directly when they are hungry. Demons. Those who could grow big and become great demons were not good people. This was because a pure fairy would have to walk a very long path to cultivate. Even the old tortoise at the back of the mountain cultivated for 10,000 years before he could cultivate a divine ability. However, by eating humans, the Fae could obtain great benefits in just a few years and become powerful. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and leaned on the pillow, half of her face hidden under the blanket. After a long time, she said in a muffled voice, Aren't good demons harming people? Ning Chen's hand that was silently counting the prayer beads on his fingers paused. He raised his eyelashes slightly, revealing his dark eyes. His gaze was deep. It was even sharp. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were still pure and clear, without a trace of dark filth. Ning Chun stared at her for a long time before slowly looking away. Harming people means that one's mind is not firm. If one wants to solve everything, it will only lead to evil and not to the true path of cultivation. And human nature hides filth. If one is tainted with human essence, they can become powerful, but they will also become dirty. He said until here. Then he sighed. Human nature hides evil, but it also hides good. I came from among humans, and I will also guard this path of humans. This is my path of cultivation, and also my way of purifying my heart. Wei Wei Bai frowned, as if she did not understand. Monk, don't you think that everything is illusory? Why do you protect people? He valued people so much. Could it be said that he saw nothing? Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled slightly, and his eyes were clear. Then his voice lowered. Because I have yet to break away from the heavenly Tao, I still need to find a goal for my cultivation and guard this goal until I truly succeed in my cultivation. At that time, I will be able to truly see all things in the world without emotions. Wei Wei Bai blinked and then pursed her lips into a smile. Monk, I don't understand what you're saying. You need to protect a target before you can cultivate. Ning Chun lowered his head to look at the Buddhist prayer beads and replied faintly, You can say that, Ning Chun. Suddenly, the young girl murmured softly. Her voice was so soft that it carried a hint of tenderness. Ning Chun stopped counting the Buddhist prayer beads and looked up in silence. However, he saw that the young girl was already lying on the edge of the bed. She rested her face on the arm that was lying horizontally on the bed. Her black hair was draped over the side of the bed, and her gentle face was full of smiles. She said lazily, Don't the guardians feel bored? Why don't you protect me? Ning Chun frowned, pursed his lips, and sighed indifferently. Don't mess around. Go to sleep. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out, her beautiful white fingers lightly touching his cheek. The young man's face was still indifferent, and his expression was even a little too cold. She narrowed her eyes, her gaze gentle. Her fingertips slowly touched his lips, chin, and even his Adam's apple. He was like an emotionless stone statue. He didn't avoid her touch, but he didn't respond either. Wei Wei Bai's fingers finally lifted his chin. She looked at the stunning cinnabar between the young man's eyebrows and his beautiful but cold thin lips. She said faintly, Monk, you only need to guard a target to cultivate successfully. Why don't you choose me? Humans are so boring and vicious. They're not as cute as me. Chapter 2965. Speaking of this, she smiled gently. She was so beautiful that it stunned all living beings. She had an irresistible charm. Look at the world. Tens of thousands of people come and go, but no one accompanies you. I'm the only one who can accompany you. Ning Chen's eyes froze, and he stared at her motionlessly. It was as if he was moved by her for a moment. However, his cold and hard heart once again covered it. He reached out and clasped her fingers. He faintly exerted force, and he actually had the urge to break them. His fingertips paused. In the end, he just lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. He didn't say anything. The girl smiled and said, Monk, don't you think that I'm much better to you than humans? Who would like a stinky monk? Only I like you. Her self-cultivation during this period of time made Ning Chun a little confused. He thought that she was no longer clingy. He thought that she had thought it through and wanted to cultivate. He didn't expect that. The sudden confession and temptation were even more terrifying than before. Terrifying. These two words faintly appeared in Ning Chen's heart. He felt that if he was careless, he would step into a beautiful trap that she had made up. He would be consigned to eternal damnation. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about the strength of his grip on her wrist. Instead, she used her nails to slowly scratch his skin. A gentle force. It was itchy and numb. Wei Wei Bai leaned forward and said in a gentle and sweet voice, Ning Chun, can't you guard me? I'm not those stinky humans and stinky stones. If you give me 1 point, I'll give you 100 points. If you take 1 step forward to me, I can walk the rest of the way by myself. Ning Chen's eyes were still calm, but his thin lips trembled slightly. His breathing became heavier, and he finally said, It's late. It's time to sleep. Wei Wei Bai was about to continue with her seduction, but she found that she had become small again. Then a bowl slammed down. Outside the bowl, the young man's voice was as cold as ice. It seems that you're still not clean. If you don't want to sleep, don't sleep. Tonight, listen to my chanting until you regain your calmness. As soon as he said this, sure enough, the sound of her jumping came from the bowl. Smelly monk, can't I like you? So what if my 6 strands aren't clean? I didn't shave or cut my hair, so why do I have to be clean? Let me out. Can't you see what I've done? I've been chanting scriptures for many days for you and worked hard to cultivate. You won't be able to get a wife like this, do you know that? Ning Chun silently stared at the alms bowl. His voice was indifferent. A monk doesn't need to marry a wife. If you treat me like this, I'm going to be angry and hurt. I'm going to blacken in front of you. Ning Chun sat on the cattail hassock with an expressionless face. Then, he took out the wooden fish and began to knock. He chanted sutras as he knocked. The little demoness was still roaring. Knock your head! Knock your head! You're the one who forced me to eat and harm people in the future. You unromantic bald donkey. I'm so angry that I want to eat people. The sound of the wooden fish paused. The young man's voice was still calm. If you eat people and harm others, I'll lock you in the demon-subduing tower. It's dark there, and there are many big demons who specialize in eating little demons. The little lotus fairy in the bowl was silent. After a long time, she asked softly, Then will you go to the demon-subduing tower? Ning Chun looked down expressionlessly and continued to knock on the wooden fish. After knocking for a while, he said softly, Yes, I'll regularly clean up some big demons that have lost control. Cleaning up these demons required sufficient strength. Sometimes, when the strength was not enough, the demons would be captured and sealed in the demon-subduing tower. Then, when the strength was sufficient, the demons would be killed. Ning Chun did not make it too clear. After all, he was just scaring her, not really locking her up. Wei Wei Bai in the alms bowl immediately fell silent. It seemed like she was really frightened. Ning Chun was about to continue chanting sutras when he heard her calm voice from the alms bowl. Then, if I really harm people in the future, you can lock me in the demon-subduing tower. I'll try my best not to be eaten. At this point, she smiled. Then, I'll be able to see you. Ning Chun pursed his lips, his calm expression somewhat frozen. The little lotus fairy was still speaking slowly. So, monk, don't beat me to death in the future. Just lock me up. I still want to accompany you, always accompany you. Ning Chun turned his head to look at the alms bowl. He reached out and touched the alms bowl, but did not take it away. He just said indifferently, Cultivate well. No one will beat you to death. There was no fluctuation of emotions in his words, but his tone unconsciously softened a bit. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. Chapter 29:66. The dark shadow spread upwards bit by bit. A pair of pale hands condensed from the darkness and stretched out from the black shadow. The strangely beautiful fingers slowly moved forward. The youth sat on the futon and frowned slightly. He seemed to have sensed something, and the cinnabar between his brows became brighter, just as the fingers were about to touch his face. Suddenly, another hand grabbed the pair of hands from the darkness. Hey, do you know who he is? How dare you touch him? The girl's cold voice carried a hint of laziness. Only then did Ning Chun open his eyes. His eyes were cold. He saw that the pair of hands that were born from the darkness were tightly grabbed by the girl. As for the girl who had the power of purification, white fragments of light appeared on her fingertips. It was the light produced after purifying the dark energy. After Wei Wei Bai purified the hand that was about to harass the monk, she blew on her fingers and blew away the white fragments of light. The specks of light that fell to the ground were exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw Ning Chun staring at her quietly. She immediately smiled. Monk, have you found the demon here? The place they were now was not the 1,000 Yuan temple. It was a temple 10,000 miles away from the 1,000 Yuan temple. This temple no longer had a monk in charge. It was said that the incense here was originally good. But since 3 years ago, the pilgrims here began to disappear. In the end, no one dared to come here, and the temple gradually became bleak, until it became such a dilapidated place. The monks and the abbot in the temple disappeared at some point. Perhaps it was because of demons, so they reported it to the 1,000 Yuan temple. The 1,000 Yuan temple had to deal with many things every day. Demons rose everywhere, although Taoism helped to share the burden. But it was mainly the responsibility of Buddhism. Every time Ning Chun came out of seclusion, He would deal with the great demons and demons in the demon-subduing tower. The matters outside the temple were not so serious that they could not be dealt with. He would not come out. Just like the matter of this small temple now, it could be solved by other monks. But there was a little demon by his side to cultivate. Ning Chun intercepted such a mission and brought out the little lotus fairy, who liked to look at herself in the mirror instead of chanting scriptures every day. She also liked to have 6 impure senses. He slowly raised his eyes and looked at the roof beam of the ruined temple. Faint traces of blood could be seen on the beam. It seemed that something had dragged its prey up and eaten it, causing blood to drip down the beam. Old bloodstains. Not in the near future. Ning Chun faintly lowered his eyes. The temple still had the smell of incense accumulated over the years. This kind of place used to be flourishing with incense. It shouldn't have been so easily invaded by demons. If he was a great demon, he wouldn't have to be so secretive. He pondered for a moment and glanced sideways at Wei Wei Bai. She was sitting on a futon, bored. She was drawing on the ground with a wooden stick. Ning Chun glanced at him indifferently and his eyes froze. She was writing. Ning Chun. There were many Ning Chens. The young man watched for a while before slowly blinking his eyes. His mouth and tongue were a little dry. She seemed to have sensed his gaze and immediately used a branch to wipe away the words on the ground. Then she pretended as if nothing had happened and said, "Monk, can't you find out? Could it be a very powerful demon?" Ning Chun looked at her indifferently for a while before calmly shaking his head. "There's no demon aura. Maybe I can only detect it at night. Some demon's residual aura would only appear at night." Chapter 2967. After all, most demons came from the dirtiest and darkest places. Sunlight had a restraining effect on them. Most of their auras couldn't be seen under the sun. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with both hands. The delicate girl pouted and muttered unhappily, "Monk, this place is so broken and dirty. Why didn't you send someone else here? Why did you come here yourself?" Ning Chun took out a small wooden hammer from his sleeve and hit the back of her head. Wei Wei Bai's head was shaken and she almost lost her senses. Ning Chun then calmly took back the wooden hammer. "Aren't other people people too? Why do you want other people and not us?" Wei Wei Bai covered her head with her hands and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Her clear eyes were full of tears that couldn't fall. Ning Chen's heart clenched when he saw this. He was just thinking if he was too harsh with his words. Then he heard Wei Wei Bai's choked voice and said happily, "Monk, we are so happy to hear you say that, Ning Chun." Wei Wei Bai touched her head and wiped her tears. "You can talk about other people, but you talk about me and you talk about us. Sure enough, we are the closest. Ning Chan." He was silent for a while before he quietly took back the wooden hammer. He couldn't understand why she was crying and laughing at the same time. "We are just us. Isn't it too much of a waste of words to say you and me?" There was indeed something wrong with this demoness brain. The sun was setting in the west. The dilapidated temple was extremely quiet. Wei Wei Bai yawned tiredly. She said lazily, "Monk, I'm so bored. Aren't you bored?" Ning Chan said calmly, "If you're bored, then recite scriptures." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Besides reciting scriptures, what else do you like?" Ning Chun seriously thought for a while before he said calmly, "Reciting scriptures is the best." Wei Wei Bai was finally defeated. She said softly, "But to me, you are the best." She said this somewhat helplessly. Couldn't be called joy, nor was it a trace of joy. It was a plain and casual sentence, but it was more like it was pulled out from the heart. Ning Chun quietly turned to look at her. However, he saw that the young girl still had her head lowered. Her long eyelashes were drooping, her skin was delicate, and her long hair was tied up with a ribbon. A beautiful flower bud was quietly blooming in her thick hair. Her appearance was too delicate and beautiful, but it carried a hint of sadness. For a moment, Ning Chun did not know how to respond. It seemed that no matter what he said, it was wrong. Not saying anything was even more wrong. In the end, he simply said, "Don't think too highly of me. It's not worth it." Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up and glared at him fiercely. Stinky monk, wait until I put you down in the future. I won't stick to you anymore. I won't want you anymore. You will cry. Ning Chun was silent for a moment before calmly nodding. I will wait for that day. Wei Wei Bai ground her teeth and snorted. Then, she turned around and crossed her arms, ignoring him. Ning Chun, who was used to being ignored by others, calmly continued to count the prayer beads and recite the scripture. Wei Wei Bai said impatiently, "What are you chanting for? So annoying. Stop chanting." Ning Chun ignored him and murmured softly. Wei Wei Bai said, "You are unreasonable." Ning Chun continued to recite the scripture. Wei Wei Bai said, "Monk, shut up, otherwise I will kiss you." Ning Chun paused and realized the meaning of this sentence. His face couldn't help but heat up slightly. Then he finally fell silent. Finally, it was night time. Wei Wei Bai ignored Monk Ning for a while. The temple at night was gloomy. The broken window lattice, the withered leaves outside the door, and the spider silk in the temple was everywhere. There was a huge incense burner, full of burnt ashes, and it was very dusty. Chapter 29:68. There was still nothing unusual in the temple. He couldn't see any signs of demons either. Ning Chen's fair wrist was wrapped around a floating prayer bead. His eyes were clear and he was not surprised. He knew what a demon without an aura was. But this time he was here to train her. So Ning Chan said in a low voice, "Do you see anything wrong with this temple?" Wei Wei Bai snorted and said with her back to him, "You're the only one who's wrong. You're the most wrong." Ning Chan said indifferently, "What's wrong with me?" Could it be that she felt that there was a demon behind him? Wei Wei Bai said, "You're ignoring me. Of course there's something wrong." Ning Chun. Then he finally felt helpless. "You're here to train your ability. Don't be so willful like a child." He suddenly felt that dealing with those big demons was not as tiring as bringing her along. He kind of understood how it felt to raise a child. It was too difficult. He held a prayer bead in his hand. Suddenly, he raised his hand and threw the prayer bead out. It fell accurately into the incense burner. He slowly got up from the futon, reached out and patted the creases on his white monk robe, then looked up at the incense burner. There's nothing wrong with the temple. There's no evil aura, but there are bloodstains everywhere. It was really everywhere. Although these bloodstains were obvious, they had been cleaned up. But the remaining traces showed how much blood had splashed. Not only was there blood on the beam, but there was also blood on the ground and under the table. Even the Buddha statue was covered in blood. Ning Chen's gaze fell on the incense burner. "You've been locked up by me. You can't escape." The pilgrims and the Buddhist disciples in the temple, a total of 63 people, died because of your greed. The incense offerings did not nurture your spirituality, but nurtured evil. Wei Wei Bai looked up strangely and glanced at the incense burner. "Monk, why are you talking to yourself in front of the incense burner? Are you so bored that you've gone crazy?" Ning Chen's originally cold gaze landed on her body, bringing with it a hint of helplessness and gentleness. Then he stretched out his hand, grabbed her collar, and lifted her up lightly from the ground. "Learn well." After saying that, he moved his fingertips. Inside the incense burner, the light of the Buddhist prayer beads overflowed. Within the golden halo, a shriek rang out. He was filled with resentment. "Stinky monk, why are you treating me like this? Let me out." Wei Wei Bai saw a ferocious monster's face appear on the previously silent incense burner. It kept roaring on the incense burner, popping out and being dragged back in. "I am blessed with good deeds. You can't treat me like this." Ning Chen's face was calm, but his eyes were cold. He said in a low voice, "Merits? Is it the merit of eating humans?" The incense burner's voice was sharp. "I'm just following my desires and cultivating myself. What's wrong with eating humans? Humans eat all living things and harm all living things. What they pray for every day is not just lust. They want money, wealth, sex, and even curse others to die. Humans worship me, but my furnace is full of evil thoughts. It's all humans' fault. Ning Chun remained indifferent. If this bit of twisted logic could move him. He had long been devoured by his own darkness. He took a step back and said to Wei Wei Bai, who was watching the show, "Purify it." Wei Wei Bai looked at the struggling, ugly face on the incense burner and immediately refused. "So ugly. You want me to touch it?" Ning Chun observed the incense burner again. Then he turned back and said seriously, "It's not that ugly. Don't slander it. Go." Chapter 2969. Wei Wei Bai was anxious. "Monk, if this isn't considered ugly, then wouldn't I be the #1 beauty in the world? Where are your eyes?" Ning Chun pondered for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yes, you are the #1 beauty, so go and purify it." These honest words sounded too good to be true. Wei Wei Bai immediately went to purify it happily. Seeing her so happy, Ning Chun suddenly thought of a way to stop her from being angry. Praise her beauty? Wei Wei Bai took out a handkerchief and wrapped her fingers. Then, she touched the incense burner lightly and began to purify it. The demon's face on the incense burner was abnormally terrifying. Kept howling. "What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? What's wrong with eating humans? I've painstakingly stood here and endured the evil thoughts of humans for 100 years. Why can't I eat them back? Do you know how painful it is for me? Stupid monk, you're so hypocritical. What Buddha is merciful? Merciful my ass. You only attacked us demons for your own merit." It laughed sinisterly. "What's the difference between you and me? It's just that our paths are different. That's why you see us as thorns in your flesh." Ning Chun looked at it silently, unmoved. Then he looked at Wei Wei Bai. He realized that she was not affected at all. Although her aptitude was poor, her temperament was good. After all, the words of demons were the easiest to bewitch people. Many people with weak wills would be easily lured away. The evil intentions on the incense burner were getting lesser and lesser. It was anxious and immediately turned to lure Wei Wei Bai. "You're also a demon. You're on the same side as me. What's in it for you to help this monk? He'll kill you sooner or later." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she immediately exploded. "Who's on the same side as an ugly monster like you? You're so ugly. Why don't you just kill yourself? You still have the face to talk to me? Are you worthy? Bah, you're not worthy." The incense burner. These words were so vicious that it broke the demon's heart. It said blankly, "The monk wants to kill you." Damn, this was the main point. Wei Wei Bai increased the intensity of the purification. "So what if he kills me? I'm happy to do so. Who asked me to lust after his beauty? Even if I die under a peony, I'll still be a romantic ghost. If I can get close to her one day, I'll give up my life." The incense burner. It was ugly and shameless. How could she make it sound so righteous when she coveted beauty? She was obviously even more shameless than it. The incense burner finally struggled with all its might. It shook the incense burner and scattered the ashes. Wei Wei Bai's face was expressionless as she plucked a small leaf from her ear with one hand. The small leaf grew bigger and turned into a large lotus leaf. She held the pole of the lotus leaf and used it as an umbrella to block the ashes. Then, he used all his strength to stuff all the purifying light into the incense burner. The malicious black gas and the ferocious demonic face dissipated in an instant. Bit by bit, they turned into white light fragments. The young girl stood in the shattered light, supporting herself with a lotus leaf, slender and elegant. She waved her hand and said with disdain, "I need to wash my hands clean to purify an ugly monster. Monk, I say, can you let me purify a beautiful demon next time, Wei Wei Bai, who sensed that something was wrong, turned around. She saw Ning Chun standing in front of her. The beautiful young man's expression was unusually cold. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was gorgeous and demonic. His thin lips were lightly pursed. There was a deep and unfathomable treachery in his dark eyes. After staring at her for a while, he slowly reached out and grabbed her neck. Behind him, a dark shadow was already pressing against his back. The shadow silently whispered in his ear, words that only he could understand. Hell is getting bigger and bigger. Do you know why? There are cracks in your heart. You have desires. You have something to cling to. You're finished, Ningchen. Chapter 2970. You're finished, Ningchen. Normally, the evil thoughts in the ashes were nothing to him. But he forgot that this did not belong to the demons of the incense burner, but the malice of humans. The incense burner carried the desires of humans. The ashes were filled with the desires of humans. And these were the favorite food of the dark hell in his heart. Without him noticing, the darkness ran out again. It even brought out the darkest thoughts in his heart. Kill the little lotus fairy, because she was the most important reason for the crack in his heart. No matter how much he purified, his heart would have desires and attachments. Then they were all nourishment. It would strengthen this hell to the point where he could not suppress it. A person with Buddha's bone should be firm to the point that no evil could invade. That was why he could be attached to so much darkness and not be affected. But now he had a little fondness for her. This fondness made him feel a sense of crisis. His fingertips, with a slight force, could cut off her neck with the sharp light of Buddha. Ning Chen's eyes were dark and strange. The shadow behind him was lying on his back, constantly bewitching him silently. Kill her, kill her, kill her, you can also achieve your goal. What you want is her purifying power. Even if she succeeds in cultivation and becomes a purifying holy object, she may not sacrifice herself to purify you. So, killing her and turning her into a lifeless object is the most right thing to do. Countless words were transmitted into his ears from the shadow. Complicated and vast evil thoughts kept eroding his rationality. The girl in front of him seemed to have noticed something. She raised her head slightly and did not struggle. She just stared at him in confusion. His indifferent face was reflected in her beautiful eyes. As if she had finally confirmed something, she asked softly, "Monk, do you want to kill me?" The killing intent in his eyes was too obvious. Ning Chun looked at her indifferently, as if he was looking at the incense burner just now. Wei Wei Bai was not afraid. Instead, she walked forward slowly. His fingers did not exert force. Instead, he tried his best to relax and tremble. She walked in front of him and touched his face with both hands. The beautiful young man had fair and slender skin. His fingertips felt very good as they slid across his skin. She smiled, her eyes curved into crescents. "So in your evil thoughts, is there a desire to kill me? Is it because I annoy you every day? So you hate me? Do you hate me that much, monk?" Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled. He wanted to say that he didn't hate him, but her lips seemed to be sealed. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the shadow grew in size and pressed down on him until he couldn't breathe. The girl in front of him sighed faintly. "You can kill me, but I have to pay a price. Otherwise, wouldn't I be too useless? I won't be able to get any benefits from being killed by you," Wei Wei Bai said as she reached out to undo his clothes. He didn't dare to move. A trace of bloody red appeared in his dark eyes. Wei Wei Bai had never seen such a terrifying expression on his stone face. She coquettishly reached out to caress his face, kissed his lips, and then moved downwards. In the end, she hugged him and rested her face on his unbuttoned chest, listening to his intense heartbeat. She sighed softly, exceptionally gentle and charming. "Monk, the feeling of hugging you is really good. I'm taking advantage of you, but even if you kill me 10,000 times, I'll still seduce you and make you lust for me. Resenting my persistence is also a kind of feeling." Speaking to hear, she smiled sweetly. "I'm not picky. I want all kinds of feelings." Chapter 2971. After saying that, she rubbed the skin on his chest and squinted her eyes in satisfaction. "Monk, you're really delicious." The girl's face was incomparably soft, and her body was full of fragrance. Lying on his chest, her chaotic breath was even more irresistible than the black shadow. Ning Chen's fingers trembled. Just as he was about to harden his heart and use the blood in his heart to control the black shadow. However, he saw the girl who was seductive to the bone suddenly raise her head. Her eyes were fierce, and she smiled coldly. Caught it. When she hugged him, her fingers actually grabbed the black shadow. The black shadow was illusory. Normal people couldn't catch it, but she had the power to purify it. She could easily catch anything with malicious intentions. However, the black shadow was cunning. If she didn't deliberately hug him, the black shadow hid in another place. It was difficult for her to catch it. The black shadow struggled desperately in her hands, but it couldn't resist Wei Bai. She gritted her teeth and used all her power, including the power of the prayer beads that Ning Chun gave her in her sleeve to purify it. The black shadow became fainter and fainter. Her face turned pale. If the prayer beads absorbed too much, it wouldn't do her any good. Finally, the black shadow disappeared. She heaved a sigh of relief and wrapped her arms around his neck. She tiptoed and rubbed his face. Okay, you're really worrisome. Next time, let me know in advance. Don't suddenly erupt. Several times, the dark aura overflowed. It was all sudden. It was difficult for her to deal with it. Then, she suddenly let go. Her body fell backward softly, and her fingers slipped from his neck. Her body also became smaller and smaller as she fell. Ning Chun was shocked and hurriedly raised his hand. She fell into his palm and became a small thing. She was pale and weak. She curled up into a ball, and the flower buds on her head drooped weakly. Ning Chun felt that his breath was a little chaotic, and his chest was so tight that he couldn't breathe. His voice was low. You know that, in my obsession, I want to kill you. Why didn't you escape? Wei Bai lifted her heavy eyelids and looked at him for a while before sneering. You're really funny. How can I have a night with you after escaping? If you want to kill me in the future, take off your clothes for me to see. I'm willing to die in your hands. You're much more important than death. With that, she finally closed her eyes and fainted. Ning Chun looked at her quietly and then slowly walked out. A cold wind blew past the dilapidated temple. It was drizzling outside, so he quickly raised his sleeve to cover her. The rain fell on his body, and under his feet, besides the rain, there was also a black shadow. Although she had been purified, but she aroused his desires again. The black shadow that had disappeared reappeared. He lowered his head to look at the shadow. Finally, he used a drop of his heart's blood from his Buddha beads to fall into the shadow. The black shadow temporarily disappeared and was completely suppressed. Ning Chen's primordial chi was greatly damaged, and his face paled. He didn't say anything. He continued to slowly release golden energy from his palm to envelop her and help her recover. He heard the whisper again. Although the black shadow was suppressed, the black shadow could still mutter silently in its heart. The words were as cold as a snake, and there was a gloating laughter mixed in it. You're finished. Ningchen. You're in love. Ningchen. The young man slowly blinked. Seeing a few drops of rain fall beside her, he hurriedly covered his sleeves more tightly. A heart that was not moved by emotion or desire. Finally, it was tainted with the smell of smoke and fire. He thought of what the girl said when she hugged him, and couldn't help but smile. I'm more important than death? He asked in a low voice, but it seemed like he was talking to himself. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. He thought that he was indeed in love. Chapter 2972. Wei Bai had spent a lot of effort to purify this time. She hugged the prayer beads, and the flower bud on her head drooped weakly. Ning Chun reached out and gently touched her head. His voice was calm. You will recover. Don't use your power for the time being. Take care of yourself. She stretched out her small hands and hugged the round prayer beads. She rested her face on the prayer beads and looked at Ning Chun blankly. Monk, what if you feel uncomfortable? Ning Chen's expression froze before he said softly, I'll take a bath in the spiritual pool to suppress the growth of the dark aura. Wei Bai sneered. Without me, the dark aura in your body can't be much by relying on the spiritual pool. It was indeed the spiritual pool. It only washed away a little of the dark aura. It was more about guarding the heart. It was not about eliminating the desire of darkness. He did not continue this topic. Instead, He took out a small plate of pastries and carefully pinched a small spoon with his fingertips. He scooped a spoonful of pastries and handed it to her. "Eat more and you'll grow up," he said expressionlessly. His tone was a little stiff. It seemed that he rarely cared so much about others. Wei Bai looked up lazily, then opened her mouth. With a howl, she put the pastry into her mouth. Ning Chun silently began to feed her. It was as if he was feeding a small pet. This was a very novel feeling. If he did not suppress the growth of his emotions, he actually felt that he was raising her like this. It was a very happy and satisfying thing. After Ning Chun fed her some pastries, then he reached out and gently rubbed her hair. "Don't absorb too much. Your body is very weak now and can't bear too much power. Return to the spiritual pool to nourish yourself." Wei Bai shook her head weakly. She hugged the prayer beads and did not let go. "I don't want to. I won't be able to see you when I go back. I won't go." Ning Chun looked at her indifferently for a while before he sighed helplessly. Then, he lifted her up and walked out. He walked to the surface of the water and put her in. Then he sat on a lotus leaf and meditated. "Okay, I'm here." Wei Bai's small body automatically turned into a lotus and returned to the spiritual pool. This was how she absorbed energy the fastest. She moved the plate, then tilted the stem and rested it on his lap. "Monk, I'm going to sleep. Don't leave me behind." Ning Chun reached out and gently stroked her petals. The young man's calm face, in the hazy fog, was strangely beautiful. His voice was calm but gentle. "Sleep, I won't leave." The little lotus nodded and slowly calmed down. Soon, the lotus lost its usual spirit and vitality. When she subdued the incense burner, she used 70 to 80% of her strength. To suppress his dark energy, she overdrew her own life. Ning Chun gently placed his finger on her petals, and his eyes finally revealed traces of hidden warmth. Suddenly, his fingertips paused as he saw a dark aura emerge from the spirit pool. The aura condensed into the shape of a young girl. She was in the water, smiling sweetly as if she was seducing him. Ning Chun glanced at him indifferently and then lowered his head to look at the little lotus. As for the young girl in the spiritual pool, she was also crushed by the Buddhist beads. Even the spiritual pond had been contaminated by his desires. Ning Chun knew that he couldn't fall in love. Once a human's feelings were stirred up, then it was endless persistence and greed. He had already started to be greedy. He wanted to keep her by his side, even to have a sense of manliness. The young girl just now was what he had been thinking about. Last time in the spiritual pool, her wild temptation had been hidden in his heart. Chapter 2973. Every time he thought about it, he couldn't suppress her seductive charm in the spirit pool. That led to her shadow appearing in the dark hell, and it was the shadow of desire. Ning Chen's fingers gently touched her petals. He silently suppressed this terrible desire. In the spirit pool, a young man with a pure face hugging a beautiful lotus, an exceptionally beautiful scene. Around them, the fog in the spirit pool was slowly turning black. It was unusually strange and evil. Wei Bai had to recuperate for almost a month before she could grow bigger. During this time, the young man didn't lose control. That huge black shadow also seemed to have disappeared. The system observed for a long time before saying, "His desire has deepened. The black shadow has become bigger, but it is suppressed by the male lead." This suppression, which day would it erupt? Even the host couldn't suppress it. After all, compared to the host's three-legged cat purification power, the darkness in the male lead's heart was really a hell. Wei Bai lay on the bed, holding the prayer beads with a relaxed expression. Let him be dark. How can there be feelings if he doesn't have feelings? If I don't have feelings, there won't be favorability. I'm going to eat him if he doesn't have feelings. What if he directly destroys me? What was this thing called feelings? Was it beautiful? A little. But it was more of possession, persistence, madness, and desire. These were not good words. And these were what true feelings were like. When a monk was moved, his desire would only grow bigger. And this thing called desire was the nourishment that nourished his hell. The prayer beads in Wei Wei Bai's hand emitted a beautiful light. She lazily turned over, looked at the prayer beads and said, Ning Chun hides a hell in his heart. It's very difficult to make him go crazy, because he couldn't go crazy. Once a crack appeared, the consequences would be more terrible than anyone else. So this kind of person's self-control was strong to an unimaginable extent. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said slowly, With my beauty, he can resist not touching me. His perseverance is top-notch. System. The host would never admit that his strategy was good. Anyway, the strategy was successful because he coveted her beauty. Ning Chun walked in and saw the little lotus fairy lazily lying on the bed. Her bare feet peeked out from under her skirt. Her delicate ankles were exceptionally beautiful. Her collar was a little messy, revealing her delicate collarbone. Her fair skin was faintly discernible. Ning Chun quietly stared at him for a while before silently moving his eyes away. He turned around to get the scriptures and sat on the futon. Listen well to today's lesson. I'm going out tomorrow so you can recite the scriptures after I leave. His voice was slightly hoarse, but his expression was still incomparably indifferent. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she immediately turned over and lay on her stomach beside the bed. Her beautiful eyes showed traces of blank emotions. Where are you going? Monk, why didn't you bring me along? Ning Chun flipped open the scripture and said calmly, The Taoist sect has invited me to attend a Dharma assembly. I will be back in a few days. The people there are not friendly to demons, so don't go. After all, she was a demoness who had failed in her cultivation. The Taoist aura was very unfriendly to demons. Wei Wei Bai said sweetly, Aya, you will be gone for so long. What should I do if I miss you? Ning Chun did not think about this problem. He pondered for a while and answered seriously, Just recite the scriptures if you miss me. Wei Wei Bai. Ning Chun felt that the atmosphere was a little quiet. Did he say something wrong again? However, he saw the girl lazily turn over and then lay on the bed casually and said, The days when I miss you are too hard. Why don't you leave me some souvenirs so that I can have a place to place my longing? Ning Chun lowered his eyelashes slightly, as if thinking about what could be a souvenir. However, he heard the girl say with a smile, Why don't you have a one-night stand and leave a child for me? Chapter 2974. Ning Chun raised his chin slightly, and his cold eyes fell on the girl indifferently. She was still smiling, as if she didn't think she was joking. Ning Chun thought for a moment before saying, The child of a demon and a human will be deformed. Wei Wei Bai's smile froze. Ning Chun felt that it was necessary to teach her this. When a spider demon and a human have a child, they will give birth to a child that can spit silk. When a pumpkin demon and a human have a child, it will be a big pumpkin with 4 legs. When a rock demon and a human have a child, that child will be like a rock and won't want to move. Wei Wei Bai reached out and silently covered her ears. This was the first time she felt seductive, and it was extremely painful. What was the child of a lotus demon and a monk like? A child with blooming flowers on top of its head knocking on a wooden fish and chanting scriptures? It seemed to be cuter than a pumpkin child and a rock child. After teaching Wei Wei Bai, Ning Chun let out a sigh of relief. Then he said, Okay, continue chanting scriptures. Wei Wei Bai continued to cover her ears with a hopeless expression. Stop chanting. This monk's true love was chanting scriptures. How could she not be able to defeat Jingwen after such a long time? Because he said that he would be away for a few days, the monk was afraid that she wouldn't hear enough scriptures, so he chanted scriptures the whole night. In the end, she pulled the quilt and fell asleep. Let him chant it himself. Chant it to your heart's content and live with the scriptures, you damn bald donkey. When Wei Wei Bai woke up and yawned sleepily, she saw a small bag beside her pillow. She opened the bag and took a look. More than a dozen red beans rolled out. Wei Wei Bai looked at it silently for a while before stuffing the red beans back one by one. I hope you can pick more. This is the most yearning thing. Red beans meant lovesickness. She asked for the favorability. It rose to 75. It seemed that the monk was still too shy. He didn't even dare to give her a little thing that symbolized yearning. Wei Wei Bai looked up at the progress bar. It was clearly written that the completion rate was 0. The number 100 was written on it. It represented 100 people. The favorability rating was already at 75. But she hadn't absorbed anyone's essence yet. Furthermore, the method of absorbing essence chi was to ensure that the other party was completely dead. Only then would one be considered a person. Wei Wei Bai felt that she really wanted to delay such a heartless mission. While the monk was away, it would be best to absorb a few. Otherwise, once the favorability level was maxed out, they would probably be sent to the next generation to scare people to death. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and still felt that this mission was not appropriate. She asked the system, "I feel that this mission is too difficult. Can't I request to change it?" The system said earnestly, "I know you can't get over it. After all, killing is a difficult choice. How about this? I'll choose some villains for you to kill. Don't you feel better when you think about it?" Wei Wei Bai said, "That's not the point. The point is, when you absorb the essence, will you absorb the other party's ugly genes?" System. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "I can't absorb the essence directly. Is there any other way to collect the essence? After all, the main point of the mission is not for me to absorb the essence into my body. As long as the action of absorbing the essence is completed, it will be fine." System. The host is still good at grasping the main point. Then he silently flipped through the information. "In theory, it's fine. I'll buy you a simplified version of the essence gathering box. When the time comes, you'll see a flower of essence blooming on each person's head. Just reach out and pluck it and put it into the box. / next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like." Chapter 2975. Wei Wei Bai quickly nodded, then lazily continued to turn over. "Okay, I'll try it on next time." The system looked at its lazy host. It also picked up the small shoes and began to try them on. If they didn't fit, it had to be changed. After all, if the shoes didn't fit, he wouldn't be able to run fast while carrying her. Wei Wei Bai didn't expect that the essence box could be used so soon. She estimated the time when Ning Chun would return and planned to give him a surprise. So she ran out of the temple in advance, planning to look for him on the road. In the end, in the forest at the foot of the mountain, she met a pale-faced scholar blocking her way. His face was sallow, holding a scholar's fan. He smiled and said, "Yo, little girl, where are you going? I'll send you on your way." Wei Wei Bai looked up. There was a black flower on his head. The system flipped through the information. Passerby cannon fodder armor. A bandit who kills people like flies. A ruthless flower thief. His bad habit is to rape women first and then kill them. Who knows how many women have died in his hands. This scholarly bandit was quite good at martial arts. His fingers were just about to reach out and grab this extremely beautiful girl. But he saw Wei Wei Bai reach out and grab his head expressionlessly, as if she was grabbing some air. Then she jumped away and looked at him coldly. The bandit revealed a sinister smile. Just as he was about to rush over to grab her, he found that his body had withered. Then he collapsed with a bang, turning into a withered corpse. Wei Wei Bai quickly threw the black flower into a box. She still got some of its smell. She quickly clapped her hands and said in disdain, "It's too dirty." The side mission also increased by 1 point. There were still 99 people left. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about this episode. She turned around and ran forward happily. From afar, she really saw Ning Chen's robe floating in the air. She quickly shouted, "Monk Ning, damn bald donkey. I'm here." The youth in the robe looked down. He saw the little lotus spirit jumping and chasing after him. Ning Chen. Then, he showed a helpless expression, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl into a smile. The Dharma robe fell to the ground. He was about to reach out and grab her. The delicate girl had already reached out and hugged his neck. Her entire body leaned over and pressed against him. "Monk, I miss you so much. Do you miss me?" Ning Chen's breath caught in his throat. He could only smell the girl's fragrance, which made his mind go blank for a moment. He gently raised his hand and placed it on her back. but he didn't dare to hug her back. Wei Wei Bai rubbed against him in satisfaction and said, "Monk, I've used my spiritual energy to nourish your lovesickness bean into a flower. Look." She left him and took out from her sleeve a large handful of leafy yellow flowers with green pods on them. It was a plant that grew after the red bean sprouted. She smiled and said, "You've been away from me for too long. My yearning has blossomed and I've given birth to another child." Ning Chen's eyelashes drooped slightly as she quietly stared at the handful of pods and yellow flowers in her hand. There were also fresh red beans in the pod. The red beans that he had given her had given birth to more red beans. Ning Chen once again looked up, his eyes becoming warm and gentle. "Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 78. He reached out and took the bean sprouts that she had ripened with her spiritual energy. His fingertips touched the soft leaves and flowers. The fresh smell was exceptionally pleasant. Just as he was about to say something, his eyelashes suddenly trembled and his brows slightly furrowed. Her body had the aura of a human's essence. Wei Wei Bai saw him take the red bean sprouts and immediately hugged him lazily. "Monk, I've run too far and my feet are tired. Carry me." Ning Chan was silent for a moment before he carried her up with one hand and placed her on the Dharma robe. He was silent for a moment. When he looked up again, there was already nothing strange about him. And let's go back. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2976. After Ning Chun returned, he took out the tranquil heart lamp that he had gotten from the Taoists. This lamp had many effects. The most important effect was to calm the heart and calm the qi. It was also one of the Dharma treasures to suppress the dark aura. The little lotus spirit needed more time and more essence to cultivate herself, instead of wasting her strength and stagnating. Wei Wei Bai sat on the table and looked at the lamp curiously. She reached out and touched the cluster of white fireworks. It was not hot. Instead, it was very cold. Ning Chun did not stop her. Instead, he took out a brush, dipped it in the fireworks, and began to draw talismans. This was a Taoist skill. He had learned some. After drawing the Taoist talisman, he rolled it up and tied it with a red rope before hanging it around Wei Wei Bai's neck. This talisman can help you calm your heart. Cultivators are most afraid of having an unstable heart. Wei Wei Bai reached out and picked up the talisman. She said with a smile, "Red beans represent longing. What does the talisman represent?" She thought that Ning Chun would not answer. However, she saw him turn around slightly and take the scriptures. His voice was calm. Worry. He was worried that something would happen to her, so he specially drew the talisman. Moreover, he would rather use the more powerful Taoist talisman than the Buddhist one, because Taoists were indeed more powerful in terms of calming the heart. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she suddenly reached out and hugged him happily. "Monk, I'm so happy to hear you say that." As she spoke, she hugged him and rubbed against him. Ning Chen's breathing paused. He reached out and grabbed her collar, placing her on the table. "All right, stop fooling around. After so many days, it's time to start chanting the scriptures." After saying that, he ignored her and began to flip through the scriptures. However, the tip of his ears was slightly hot. It was just that it was not obvious, so it was hard to tell. Wei Wei Bai chanted the scriptures for more than 10 days. In the past 10 days, she tried her best to flirt with him, but his favorability didn't move much. Finally, one day, while he was meditating and sleeping on the futon, she stole a kiss on him. She let him use the alms bowl for an entire night. Only 1 point of favorability was deducted. 79. The old turtle's favorability slowly increased. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the side quest again. She was no longer anxious. After all, he was still 99 points away from completing the side mission. If the main mission was completed, the side mission would be considered a failure. The main storyline was 79. Side mission 1. During this period of time, he had to focus on completing the side quests. Wei Wei Bai was lying on the lotus. The monk had gone to hold a Dharma assembly, so she stayed in the spiritual pool to recuperate. Have there been any bad guys recently? If he absorbed the essence of a good person, it would be harder for him to clear his name in the future. Therefore, the target was definitely an evil person. The system flipped through the list. Yes, it's the lair of that infamous bandit from last time. They're in cahoots, and all of them have committed countless crimes. None of them are good people, and they wreak havoc everywhere. You killed that scholar, and the bandits who were with him are looking for the murderer to take revenge. Wei Wei sat up and supported her chin with her hands. Her eyes were dark. Oh, they want to take revenge on me. They are so vicious. The system said. Basically, they've done all kinds of evil things. When the horse bandits massacred the village, they didn't even spare the old, the weak, the women, and the disabled. Wherever they went, they killed, burned, and robbed. Wei Wei said. They're so vicious. Does the monk know? Why didn't he stop them? The system said. The male protagonist cultivates the path of humanity and follows nature. He feels that there's both good and evil in human nature, so he shouldn't interfere too much. Wei Wei sneered. Monk Ning is actually quite cold. For the sake of his path, he's really cold to all living things. All living things rotate, regardless of good or evil. He just had to let people live on their own. Quick / you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like, comma. Chapter 2977. Wei Wei said again. Monk Ning doesn't care if humans kill each other, but he cares if demons eat humans. After all, he killed big demons and great demons. These were all nourished by humans. The system studied the data for a while before saying, yes, because demons eating humans will cause a devastating blow, it is not natural. And the small fights between humans will not destroy themselves no matter what, so there is no need to care. It was like how many ants died in a chaotic battle. It would not cause the extinction of ants. But if it was an external attack such as rain or fire, the ant nest would be finished. In Ning Chen's eyes, the attacks of demons were rain and fire. He definitely needed to intervene. So if Wei Wei ate humans, it would definitely be one of his achievements. It seems that before the mission is completed, I must not expose myself. I feel that the way Monk Ning looked at me after I came back last time was not right. I have to be careful. Although Ning Chun was habitually expressionless, but she just happened to be observing him. Sometimes the way he looked at her was a little cold. Wei Wei hoped that she did not expose herself. She took advantage of Ning Chen's Dharma assembly and successfully found the bandits' lair under the guidance of the system. Most of the bandits had gone out to rob. Only a dozen or so guards were left. She, a delicate girl who was so beautiful that people couldn't look away, suddenly appeared outside the bandits' lair. How could the bandits not be tempted? When they saw her, they were like wolves seeing fresh meat and immediately rushed out to grab her. But they didn't expect that the moment the dozen or so people came over, before they could reach out, the girl in front of them had already gently raised her hand and seemed to have plucked something in the air. Their movements collapsed and turned into shriveled corpses. Wei Wei counted. There were 12 black-hearted essence. The more vicious a person was, the darker their essence. These essence were so dark that it made people sick. So Wei Wei immediately went to wash her hands. She was such a cute and kind little fairy. These people's essence was not worthy of touching her hands. Next time, she would make a glove and pluck these essence every day. She didn't know if it would make her fingers turn black. The first requirement of a beauty was to be fair. If her skin was darker, she would not be beautiful. After Wei Wei washed her hands, she hurried back to the temple. Just as she returned to the spiritual pool, she saw Ning Chun standing quietly on the long bridge. The beautiful young man quietly stood in the hazy fog. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was still gorgeous. His thin red lips were pursed lightly, and his eyes were incomparably clear. Wei Wei immediately waved her hand. Comes Monk Ning's Dharma's Dharma assembly. Ning Chun quietly looked at her for a while, then indifferently landed on the water and walked to her side. He casually sat on a lotus leaf and nodded indifferently. Yes, I've already assigned them homework. Let them digest the content of the spiritual conference on their own. You Dharma 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 ma the Dharma Dharma play Dharma 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 Dharma. Dharma there's Dharma there a Dharma 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 the rather a Dharma Dharma there a Dharma Dharma is her TSSSS. To Lu is to buy SSO. Ning Chunqing froze for a moment and then breathed a sigh of relief. He reached out and touched her hair as if he had accepted his fate. But he didn't go any further. The two of them snuggled up to each other in the lotus field. It was a heartwarming scene. The girl seemed a little tired. She closed her eyes lazily. Her breathing gradually became even. Her side profile was soft and beautiful. She had a slight blush. Chapter 2978. More than half of the purified power had returned to him. His body wasn't that weak. Ning Chen's fingers gently fell on her cheek, and his cold eyes finally softened a little. The skin under his fingers was delicate and tender, as smooth as a flower petal. The cinnabar between the youth's eyebrows was redder, and there was even a trace of demonic darkness. It was as if his desires couldn't be suppressed and overflowed. His fingertips trembled slightly, and he silently chanted the scripture again to suppress the desires in his body. Then, just as he was about to withdraw his hand, he stopped as if he sensed something. Once again, the aura of human essence appeared. Ning Chun frowned strangely, and he looked at the sleeping girl. Suddenly, he leaned over and sniffed her neck. Nothing. She was clean. If demons absorbed human essence, then the essence would definitely stay in the body, and this kind of aura would be emitted everywhere. But she was clean. But he did sense that kind of aura. Just as he was about to lower his head again to smell somewhere else, the girl suddenly opened her eyes, and her eyes were bright. He moved closer, and she suddenly raised her head again. The two people's lips rubbed against each other. Ning Chun was stunned for a moment before he reacted, and his face turned red. He immediately pushed her away from behind, but she had already taken the opportunity to wrap her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. Her soft lips were like the most fragrant wine. Even if this monk had never drunk wine before, he also felt that kind of uncontrollable, unstoppable, and even dizzy intoxication. His breath was filled with her fragrance. His heartbeat began to accelerate uncontrollably, and his skin temperature began to boil. Everything was on the verge of going out of control. He abruptly grabbed her arm and took a step back before he left her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just woken up, and there were traces of hazy mist in her eyes, and the corners of her eyes were red as she looked at him. She slowly stretched out her fingertips and gently touched her lips, and then said with a smile, "Monk, what were you doing just now? Stealing a kiss from me?" This was simply a bogus accusation. Ning Chun couldn't explain, and suddenly moved closer to her. After all, her body was very clean, and there was that kind of faint human aura. It was more like an illusion. Wei Wei Bai lazily propped up her chin with one hand and gave him a coquettish look. "Don't hide. We're in love with each other. Let's take this opportunity to do something good." Ning Chun didn't even look at her. Instead, he stood up calmly and walked across the water. His footsteps were steady, but they caused ripples on the water surface. His footsteps seemed to have become heavier. Wei Wei Bai also jumped up and chased after him. "Monk, don't go. Come, let's do something beautiful together." Ning Chun ran even faster. Wei Wei Bai giggled as she ran over and clung onto his back. Ning Chen's footsteps were a bit messy. His tone was heavy. "Let go." Wei Wei Bai hugged him like a koala bear, squinting her eyes as she said, "You're mine, so I won't let you go." With great difficulty, he finally made it back to the meditation room, just as he was about to wave his hand to summon the bowl. However, he felt the gentle breath of the young girl on his back gently caressing his neck. Her voice was sweet. "Monk, are you attracted to me? Otherwise, why did you suddenly sneak over? Do you want to touch me?" Ning Chin paused. The girl behind him was trying hard to rub against him, but she just didn't let go of him. She whispered enchantingly, "You can do whatever you want to me. I can bear anything." Ning Chen's breath was heavy, and the cinnabar between his eyebrows was burning. His fingertips trembled slightly, and his voice was cold. Let go. Obviously, he could push her away himself, but he could only stand there in a daze. Only his voice had some strength. Wei Bai clung to him like a rascal. What can you do if I don't let go? It was as if she knew that he wouldn't do anything. She was so bad that she deliberately continued to cling to him, touching him up and down. Just as her hand was about to enter the unspeakable place, suddenly, the world turned upside down, and she was pressed down on the table. Under the table, there were scriptures scattered in all directions. Her eyes were a little dazed, and she looked up at Ningchen, who was on top of her. The young man lowered his eyes to look at her. In his black eyes, there was a kind of thick darkness that made people feel uneasy. He was a little different from usual, that kind of abstinent coldness, but there was a hint of dangerous hostility. It was as if some kind of demon beast was hiding in it, ready to make a move. Chapter 2979. The strength of his fingertips was a little strong. The uncontrollable strength of his fingertips was even trembling. Wei Bai slowly blinked her eyes before she reacted and revealed a happy smile. Monk, you have a reaction? Ningchen didn't say anything. His thin lips were pursed, and a trace of red faintly appeared in his dark eyes. The seductress under him didn't seem to know what consequences she would cause. She was still unforgiving and proud. I'm so beautiful. Even a stone would be warm. You're moved, right? She didn't have the self-awareness of flirting with him at all. It was as if she didn't intend to take responsibility for whatever bad things she did. She just viciously felt that she was very powerful. She even struggled for a while, and her fingertips gently rubbed against his fingers. That careless action didn't feel serious at all. It was just to make him crazy. Ningchen lowered his eyelashes slightly. He slowly lowered his head. His breath was hot, and his eyes were terrifyingly cold. The girl under him had a stunning appearance, and her eyes were so clear that one could see the bottom. He could even see the excitement in her eyes. She seduced his pride. His thin lips gently pressed against her lips. His breath was hot. His kiss was cold. He was moved. What surged out of his feelings was a dark possessiveness. He pinched his fingers together and heard her gasp as he wished. It hurt. The gloominess in Ningchen's eyes spread a trace of evil heat. This was the darkness that belonged to the depths of his heart that had been tainted. The girl's fragrance was like a kind of breath that tempted him to enter hell. His soft lips were only lightly pressed against hers. This was a restrained kiss that didn't go further. The girl beneath him seemed to be in disbelief. Then, she tentatively licked him lightly. His body trembled. The moment before everything went out of control. Wei Bai only felt the strength on her wrist loosen, and the young man on top of her disappeared. Only the sun shone in the empty meditation room. The scriptures scattered on the ground. She sat up quietly, reached out to touch her lips and sighed. Tongzi, the monk is blooming. Ding! The system has been blocked. Ningchen stepped into the devil-subduing tower and killed a few great demons. Then he sat down in the dark devil-subduing tower and closed his eyes to recite the scriptures. In the darkness, countless demons whispered to each other. Monk, is there a crack in your mental state? Is he going to become a demon? Who was it that caused your heart to crack like this? You sure have a good heart. You still haven't dealt with such a huge heart demon. I see it. It's the love test. Which family's little sister is this? Send her to us and let us see how delicious she must be to move your heart. I've been waiting for this day for so long. Little bald donkey, you're suffering from a heart demon. You're hopeless. Ningchen slowly opened his eyes. Between his eyebrows, there was a bright red cinnabar. He looked into the darkness. There was a trace of uncontrollable madness in his clear eyes. Then, he raised his hand, and the prayer beads floated up from his beautiful fingertips. Countless prayer beads scattered, breaking through the demon's defenses. Countless evil creatures in the darkness screamed. Mournful screams rang out. Finally, the demon-subduing tower regained its silence. The young man's face paled. He lifted his finger and found that his power was faintly emitting a dark aura. He never used too much power, because this power was to purify and suppress his own body. He looked at his finger indifferently and found the hell in his heart. Without the suppression of too much power, it had begun to spread. The black shadow was huge and extended from under his feet. Chapter 2980 kept growing up. Finally, it turned into a terrifying giant shadow, shrouding him. The black shadow let out a silent, twisted laugh. Ning Chun was expressionless, until the black shadow slowly became smaller. The black shadow condensed into a graceful and beautiful body. A young girl stepped out of the black shadow. Her features were delicate, her eyes were clear, and her every move had a seductive charm. The young girl slowly squatted down, reaching out to touch his face. She moved closer to him silently. Ning Chun did not push her away, but stared at her for a long time. Only then did he reach out and shatter the illusion that came from his heart. Then the young man closed his eyes and meditated again. He did not know how long could he last. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 85. Wei Bai heard the favorability notification and immediately said, "The side quest needs to be faster, or else it won't be completed before 100. The system immediately said, "Remember that nest of bandits? Because you killed their gatekeeper, they were angry and started killing people everywhere." Wei Bai's eyes lit up. "Good. They are so heartless. If I don't get rid of them, I'll be letting my conscience down." The system flipped through the information. "They have a lot of people. If we catch all of them, there will be about 105 of them." Wei Bai immediately counted with her fingers. "I already have 13 lives in my hands. I just need to pick 87 more flowers to complete the side quest." The host's math was really good. The system silently stopped its action of taking out the calculator. Wei Bai thought about it seriously, then asked, "Where's Monk Ning?" This provocation ignited the monk's anger. He definitely would not dare to face her for a while. There was no helping it, he was too pure. He was too shy. Man C was so troublesome. The system said, "I can't see what he's doing." He entered the Tower of Demon Subduing. Wei Bai looked like an experienced driver. He's not angry, so he went to exercise. For example, killing a few big demons. When he was tired, he could enter sage mode and become cold-hearted again. He was a man. She was clear. Wei Bai said, "He won't be coming out for a while. Let's go pick some flowers." After saying that, she immediately turned small and ran out happily. It would be easier for him to escape if he turned small. The youth in the demon-subduing tower suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep. The boundary line he left at the door of the meditation room was touched. This was what Ben could have done, because he left in a hurry, afraid that something would happen to her. Therefore, he left a line so that no one could get close to the meditation room. She could go out. However, going out would definitely cause ripples in the barrier. Ning Chun looked at the door expressionlessly. Where to? Looking for him? He lowered his eyes and looked at his fingertips. He could no longer suppress the black gas. He couldn't suppress the longing in his heart. He suddenly sighed softly. Perhaps it was because he wanted to fulfill his desires and obtain her. Just as this thought came to him, he immediately stopped. He knew that it was the darkness in his heart that had started to take over that caused him to waver. Ning Chun pursed his lips. If he was drowned by his desires, he would degenerate into a demon. At that time, he was not the same as he was now. Demons were unbridled and reckless. He would destroy her. Ning Chun hesitated for a moment and crushed another Buddha bead. There were only 3 drops of blood in his heart. It was not long after he was born and entered the temple. The old abbot took 3 drops of blood from his Buddha bones that were not stained with darkness. There would be no more after it was used up. Because his Buddha bones were stained with dark aura, he couldn't use them. Chapter 2981. The Buddhist Beads Shattered. The power of the heart's blood purified the darkness on the Buddhist bone again. The gate of hell slowly closed again. Ning Chun saw that the black shadow had completely disappeared. He waved his hand, and the Buddhist beads turned into a string again and hung on his wrist. He slowly stepped out. The tower of exorcism was empty. Only the chains that locked the big demon hung silently in the darkness. Ning Chun returned to the door of the meditation room and looked at the empty room. He narrowed his eyes and went to the spiritual pool again. He didn't see that small figure. He began to slowly, carefully, step by step throughout the temple. No, where did it go? Ning Chun looked at the door of the temple. Did it run out? Wei Bai washed her hands and felt that they couldn't be washed clean. So she asked the system for strong soap. After washing until her fingers were wrinkled, she said with satisfaction, "These bandits are not human. Are they not embarrassed to be so black?" Their vital essence was as black as coal. None of them were good people. The system took out an abacus and counted. 13 plus 51. A total of 64. There are still 36 people left. Wei Bai wiped her hands clean and ran in the direction of the temple. There's no other way. There's not enough time. The monk will be suspicious if he can't find me. I'll find a chance to kill the remaining bandits in the future. She didn't know why the side quest asked her to kill 100 people. It seemed that the side quest had been mining since. The side quest was even more heartless. If she could get the side quest's vital essence. The vital essence was probably even blacker than the bandits. Wei Bai had just arrived at the door of the meditation room when the system said, "The male lead is back." She stopped in her tracks and quickly adjusted her state of mind. She didn't expect the monk to come back so soon. She wasn't afraid that the fact that she killed people would be exposed. She was afraid that she would be discovered before she killed 100 people. Because once she was discovered, it wouldn't be easy to kill in the future. Even if they were evil people. Monk Ning, that old fogey, would probably keep a close eye on her. She wouldn't have a chance to do it. If the side quest couldn't be completed, she didn't dare to farm favorability. Without a deeper favorability, Monk Ning wouldn't let her go. That would be a deadlock. It was hard to say when the time would suddenly flow. As soon as Wei Bai stepped into the room, she saw Ning Chun standing beside the table. Under her snow-white fingertips were scattered scriptures. He was slowly putting away the books that had fallen into disarray. Ning Chun heard the footsteps and was about to turn around. Wei Bai had already rushed over. She hugged him with both hands and tried to rub against his back. "Monk, you're back. Have you thought it through and decided to marry me?" All the questions were summed up in this one sentence. Ning Chun seemed to be at a loss. Get married. These two words were so unfamiliar to him that it was as if he had never heard of them before. Wei Bai suddenly frowned. After releasing him, she turned around and sat down on the table. At the same time, he messed up the scriptures that he had tidied up. She reached out and tapped his chest. "Monk, you won't go back on your words, right? You did that to me and you still want to pretend that nothing happened? You're simply not human." Her expression was solemn and filled with righteous indignation. It was as if he had done something heinous. Ning Chun only felt a warmth in his chest. His breathing paused and he immediately took a few steps back. He wanted to explain something, but when he thought of something, his eyelashes drooped slightly and he fell silent again. Wei Bai smiled and walked forward. She pressed her hands on his shoulders and exhaled seductively. "Monk, am I delicious?" Chapter 2982. That's all there is to it. Ning Chun felt that the desire that he had suppressed using his heart's blood was about to be easily pried open by her again. He reached out and touched the back of her hand, wanting to avoid it. The moment his fingertips touched the girl's skin, he paused. A trace of doubt flashed through his indifferent eyes. There was another aura faintly discernible in the girl's pleasant floral fragrance. It was the aura of a human, the aura of death. He lowered his eyes, and the eyes under his eyelashes were terrifyingly dark. Ning Chun pursed his lips, but the girl had already leaned over and kissed him softly. He was stunned and immediately reached out to hold her wrist. His other hand pressed down on her shoulder, preventing her from continuing to kiss him. He whispered, "Don't do this." Wei Wei Bai muttered in dissatisfaction. "You can kiss me? Can I kiss you for a long time?" This made the youth speechless. It was indeed a sentence that he couldn't refute. He lowered his eyes and remained silent for a long time before suddenly holding her hand. He led her to the front of the futon and pressed her to sit down. Then he also sat cross-legged on the other futon. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. "What? Don't try to change the topic. You kissed me, so you have to take responsibility." Ning Chun pinched the prayer beads and silently looked up at her for a while before sighing softly. "The age of humans and demons is different. I will die sooner or later." He was like a magnanimous elder, his eyes cold and clean, his words gentle. "What can you do by putting your feelings on me? In less than 100 years, I will be a pile of bones. You will have nothing except sorrow and weak strength." Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Suddenly, she pursed her lips and glared at him unhappily. Then she snorted. "Are you trying to avoid your responsibility? If you don't want to marry me, just say it. Why do you have to talk so much?" She crossed her arms and said coldly, "Only you know how to reason. I know how to too. Monk, even the gods can't control feelings. Even if it's 100 years, I will love you for a year, a day, and an hour." Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled. He felt that his heart was on the verge of collapse. It wasn't that he wanted to convince her. He might as well convince himself. Wei Wei Bai was still unforgiving. "You kissed her and didn't admit it. You're not a good baldy either. You're a typical playboy. You're full of excuses and you don't intend to take responsibility for anything." Ning Chun felt that he was about to be convinced. He felt that if he did not marry her, he would be a bastard. He glanced sideways and said calmly, "Where did you go just now?" Wei Wei Bai glanced at him and said lazily, "She's looking for you." Ning Chun narrowed his eyes and asked casually, "In the temple?" Wei Wei Bai smiled. "I couldn't find you in the temple, and there were many places I couldn't go, so I went outside the temple to relax." After saying that, her eyes turned cold. "What's wrong? I'm already restricted from going out. You don't have the authority to restrict where I go now?" Ning Chun sounded a little confused. "Now?" He thought she would say that he never had the right to restrict her from going out. Bai Weiwei raised her voice with a bit of pride. "My husband has the power to restrict whether I go out or not. Do you want it?" Ning Chun. Then he silently turned to the side and did not look at her. He even took out the wooden fish and started to knock. Wei Wei Bai immediately moved the futon and smiled mischievously. "Monk, did it feel good to kiss me? You can't forget that feeling, right?" Ning Chun. Wei Wei Bai was about to continue, but she heard him say faintly, "Don't mention it." Wei Wei Bai? ? Ning Chun sighed. "Every time I want to knock this, it's like a nightmare." Wei Wei Bai. Nightmare? Ning Chun nodded slowly and knocked on the wooden fish. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "I have a nightmare about returning to the secular world." Wei Wei Bai blinked in confusion. What's a nightmare about returning to the secular world? Was it a nightmare because he wanted to marry her after returning to the secular world? Ning Chun pursed his lips. "Because after returning to the secular world, I can't recite scriptures anymore." Bai Weiwei, at the crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download the Read the Full Text. 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 Below to record the full text. Chapter 2983. Chanting Little Bald Donkey. A high-level model of destined to be alone. Wei Wei Bai wanted to crack open his skull, then take the scriptures and stuff them in. She wanted to light a fire and let him live a hot life with the scriptures. Chanting scriptures. If she wanted to seduce him in the future, she could stick the scriptures on her body and he would probably pounce on her. The system saw that the host was gloomy, felt like a demon was surrounding her, touched its arm and felt a little cold. It immediately comforted the host. The other party is just saying one thing and means another. Your favorability is so high. The little vixen Jingwen can't compare to you. You don't believe in your own ability, but you don't believe in your beauty? Wei Wei Bai touched her face and finally felt relieved. Although I know you're just coaxing me, it still feels good to hear it. Tong, you've become so gentle recently. The system was cutting off the thread and changing a few details of the clothes. He looked like a good wife and mother. We rely on each other. There are so many planes. If I'm not gentle to you, who should I be gentle to? Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that Tong, who she had never met before, was so handsome that her legs went weak. Even if they met in the end and he was really ugly, she would not dislike him. Wei Wei Bai's mood finally turned better. She also felt that the bald donkey was not so annoying. However, Ning Chun still continued to knock on the wooden fish, at an angle where no one could see. His eyes were cold and the dark aura in them slowly condensed. He realized something, but he slowly suppressed this thought. He did not even dare to think about it. He had always been truthful, but he did not dare to ask why she was stained with that aura. Maybe it was just an accident. Ning Chun slowly lowered his eyes, but he knew that this excuse was extremely ridiculous. Suddenly, the girl behind him leaned over again. She rubbed his neck softly and said coquettishly, "Monk, I'm hungry." Ning Chen's ink-like eyes wavered. He was silent for a while before he finally sighed helplessly. "What do you want to eat?" Wei Wei Bai was about to say something, but she heard him say slowly, "Except for me." Wei Wei Bai burst out laughing. "Who would want to eat you now? I was planning to treat you as a long-term food reserve. When there's nothing to eat in the future, I'll lick you a few times to satisfy my hunger." Monk Ning, who originally wanted to shut her up, didn't expect that there was always someone better than him. He had been overly affectionate to begin with, but she made it sound even more outrageous. Monk Ning's ears warmed up, and the gloominess in his heart dissipated. He couldn't bear to think about it too deeply, and he couldn't wait to escape from this obvious question. Therefore, he stopped knocking on the wooden fish and slowly stood up. The girl was still floating behind him with a smile on her face. "Monk, you're not chanting anymore?" Ning Chen's footsteps didn't hesitate. His tone was indifferent. "You're not hungry. I'm going to pick some spirit herbs for you and boil them to make some pastries." She was hungry. It wasn't because of the lack of spiritual energy. Instead, it was the desire for good food. Cultivators shouldn't have all kinds of complicated desires. Desire was liking. She liked to eat. She didn't seem like a lotus spirit, but more like a human. In fact, he shouldn't indulge her desire for good food. It wasn't good for the path of cultivation. But he heard the girl happily say softly, "Monk, you're the best. I like you so much." This mouth of hers. Ning Chun silently lowered his eyes. Forget it, he'll correct her later. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 86. Chapter 2984. Wei Wei Bai was curled up on the bed. Her small face was soft. Her eyelashes were lowered quietly as she slept soundly. Ning Chun sat by the bed and looked at her expressionlessly. After a long time, he gently raised his fingertips. It gently fell between her eyebrows. Then he took his finger back again. No, it was clean. There was no aura of death on his fair fingertips. But the aura was always there. He was born with a Buddha bone, and the Buddha bone would instinctively absorb the dark aura. And the aura on her body was absorbed by his Buddha bone. Took him a while to react. It was the aura of death. This aura was too familiar. It was the dark residue produced after the demon absorbed the essence of humans. No matter where this essence was used, under the rules of the heavenly Tao, every life would be counted to her. No matter how these auras were counted to her, they would be locked by the heavenly Tao. A golden light appeared on Ning Chen's finger. It was the power extracted from the Buddha bone, and it had the function of searching. His fingertips gently fell on her lips. Her lips were soft and slightly moist. After his fingertips touched them, they trembled. The expressionless youth lowered his eyes slightly, and a blush began to appear on his fair face. Because if the demon ate humans, then the dark aura on her lips would be the most abundant. Ning Chun took a deep breath and suppressed the feeling of surging emotions in his heart. He began to slowly rub his lips against hers. Then he was about to pull back. The girl seemed to have noticed something. She frowned slightly and licked her lower lip with the tip of her tongue. However, she accidentally licked his fair fingertips. Ning Chun was stunned and immediately pulled his finger back at lightning speed. The girl's aura remained on his fingertips, slightly moist. He lowered his head, not daring to hold his fingers, nor did he dare to pick them up to look. It was not easy to wait until the slight moist feeling on his finger dried up. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and pick up his finger. No clean. No eating humans. Ning Chun looked up and stared at her quietly. She just licked her lips, making them more delicate and beautiful, and fell into a deep sleep again. He used the mind-cleansing spell so she should not wake up easily. Ning Chen's beautiful eyes were slightly lowered. He was silent for a moment before he exhaled softly. It was fine as long as he didn't eat people. But fairies didn't just gain power through eating humans. There was also the absorption of essence energy. Every demon had a different way of absorbing essence energy. Some of them relied on the matters between men and women. This was the path that most female demonesses would choose, because this was the most thorough, simplest, and happiest way. Thinking of this, Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. A ruthless emotion almost broke through the shackles of the Buddha's heart. It was like a ferocious beast, lurking in his eyes and rolling in darkness. He looked at Wei Wei Bai solemnly. If he used that method to obtain essence qi, in that case, there was no way to determine which part of her body would have more dark aura, because the dark aura was in her body. If he wanted to investigate, he could only. Ning Chen's face was cold and silent. In the same way, if he couldn't detect her aura from the outside, then the remnant of the darkness must be in her body. Without any hesitation, Ning Chun placed his finger on her collarbone. No, he placed it on her chest, her abdomen. Nothing. His expression grew darker and darker. The fine cinnabar between her eyebrows faintly glowed with a golden light. This was the sign of her surging anger and her strength. He touched her arm. No. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were incomparably cold. His fingers were even trembling slightly. His outer skin was not stained with the dark aura. Chapter 2985. So he didn't eat her directly. Could it be that? Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes. She didn't do it on purpose, but the system reminded her. Monk Ning was taking advantage of her. Oh my God. The old monk is blossoming. He even knows how to take advantage of others. If she didn't get up quickly, she would be sorry for Monk Ning's sudden enlightenment. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned her head with sparkling eyes, only to see Ning Chen's fingers on her arm. Then she looked at herself. Not a single piece of clothing was missing. The monk's clothes were not missing either. Could it be that touching her arm was taking advantage of her? The system standards for taking advantage of Monk Ning were too lax. She pursed her lips. Just as she was about to force the monk to take advantage of her arm, she found Ning Chen's eyes deep and cold. Under his cold eyes, his thin lips were tightly pursed. His lips were slightly pale. This didn't look like he was taking advantage of her. It was more like he was touching the pork to see if it was fat enough to be slaughtered. Seeing that she had woken up, Ning Chen's hand that was touching her arm paused. His fingertips even used more force, leaving a red mark on her arm. Wei Wei Bai frowned. His eyelashes fluttered slightly, and he slowly moved his fingers away. Then he said softly, "You're awake." Wei Wei Bai immediately showed a happy smile, then turned over and lay on the side of the bed. Her long hair fell over her shoulders. The charming seductress narrowed her eyes slightly. "Monk, what's wrong with you? Are you secretly touching me?" Ning Chen's eyes fell on her face. She was a seductive girl, but she had extremely pure eyes. Extremely gorgeous. She was also extremely pure. Seductive, but for a moment. He slowly looked away and said lightly, "I accidentally touched it. If you don't want to sleep, continue listening to my chanting." Wei Wei Bai immediately turned over with a smile, reached out and twirled her hair. Her voice was soft. "Monk, you really don't mean what you say. If you want to touch me, I'm happy. You don't have to be sneaky." This sentence was said casually. The listener was counting the prayer beads between her fingers, but in an instant, she almost broke them. Normally, he would listen to overly sweet words. At this moment, it became the most piercing knife to the bone under his doubts. She grew up in a spiritual pond, and the temple was solemn and dignified. No one dared to be too licentious. When it became a spirit, it would follow by his side. What he taught her was cultivation, meditation, and chanting scriptures. No one had ever taught her these words. When did she become so seductive? Wei Wei Bai intended to continue flirting. After all, it wasn't easy for Honest Monk to appear. He didn't dare to do anything to Honest Monk who made him blush. He was even more tolerant than the old tortoise in the back mountain. He had a stone-like personality and couldn't say anything for a long time. She had spent a lot of effort to provoke his temperament. All sorts of flirtatious and sweet words came out. Otherwise, if she silently guarded him for 100 years, she might not even get a trace of his affection. She smiled and said softly, "Did I hit the nail on the head? Why aren't you saying anything? You don't have to be so polite to me." Suddenly, a hand gently stroked the back of her neck, as if it was holding a cat, and the fingers suddenly exerted force. She was stunned. Her waist was already held by the other party's other hand. Then, she turned over and lay flat on the bed. Ning Chun was already sitting on the bed. The young man's hair had grown a lot during this period of time. The strands of hair were scattered under his eyes, bringing about a trace of gloominess. He lowered his head, and his thin red lips were extremely tight. It was as if he was suppressing something. He finally asked in a low voice, "Don't have to be polite? Are you like this to everyone? //. Next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you like fast." Chapter 2986. She went out to seduce others. Was she also using such flowery words? When he was not around, she disappeared. Was she really like those indecent female demons who went out to seduce human men and then used those damned methods? Absorbing their essence? Were these sweet nothings prepared for those times as well? Wei Wei Bai instinctively felt that it was dangerous. Why did this little bald donkey seem to be here to denounce her? Her analysis of him was similar. Monk Ning was not the kind of person who would get angry for no reason. After all, his emotional fluctuations were very solid. They were not flowing at all. Anger was an intense emotional fluctuation, and it wasn't something that could happen for no reason. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Wei Wei Bai's mind, but on the surface, she still looked confused. She was like an innocent child who could not see that he was angry at all. She gently held his face with both hands, raised her head obediently, and rubbed her cheek against his chin. She was as lazy as a cat. The girl narrowed her eyes and said softly, "Monk, why are you angry? I'm only like this to you. Who else?" After saying that, she could not help but laugh. "Are you jealous? You're the only monk in this temple who catches my eye. How can there be others? No one else is as handsome as you." These words were even more frivolous, but it was her usual tone. Her image had always been top-notch. Even if she knew that this tone would anger the other party, she would continue to maintain it. Ning Chen's face was a little pale. The dark aura began to corrode the purity of his Buddhist heart. He had already suppressed a lot of inner demons. At this moment, these thoughts almost squeezed his sense of reason. He casually threw the Buddhist prayer beads aside. They floated in the air, emitting a faint white light. They seemed to have sensed the unstable mood of their master. Wei Wei Bai also instinctively felt that Monk Ning's mood was a little strange. It seemed that his Buddhist heart was unstable. Could it be that the dark hell had come out to cause trouble again? Just as she thought about this, she saw a huge black shadow appear behind Ning Chun. The black shadow was like a thick night, spreading from the bed. The bed was immediately covered by this shadow. When the shadow appeared, the meditation room was dark. It was so dark that it was too strange. She couldn't even see Ning Chen's face clearly. She could only feel his presence on her body through his fingers, his aura, and his heavy breathing. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her hand, and the power of purification appeared. He was swallowed up by the black shadow. Compared to this boundless and terrifying darkness, this purifying power was nothing more than the light of a firefly. It was insignificant. The dark hell in Ning Chen's heart was too terrifying. Wei Wei Bai was about to reach out and touch Ning Chun, intending to let him control himself. In the end, his outstretched fingers were entangled by the dark chains. Wei Wei Bai blinked in confusion. The next moment, her body was imprisoned. Huge black chains wrapped around her body. She immediately shouted angrily, "Monk, you've lost control of your power. Quickly control it." Her purifying power was completely useless in the face of such a huge malicious desire. He could only rely on Monk Ning's Buddhist light to suppress it. However, Ning Chun seemed to be controlled by the darkness. His face, which was hidden in the shadows, no longer looked holy. On the contrary, it seemed abnormally evil. He seemed to have just reacted, and a strange expression appeared on his cold face. There was endless desire hidden in his dark eyes. His voice became hoarse. "Didn't you tell me not to be polite?" By Wei Wei, at the crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com//fast download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Com fast, comma. Chapter 2987. Has the honest man suddenly turned bad? She's not used to this feeling. Wei Wei Bai immediately shows a cute smile. Why are you being so polite? With our relationship, it's too polite to talk about being polite. She uses a tongue twister while using her fingers laboriously to release a purifying power, intending to corrode the chains. Monk Ning looks wrong from the inside out. At this time, it's better not to provoke him. But just as her fingers move, Ning Chun slowly reaches out and pinches her wrist. The pain makes her gasp uncontrollably, and a trace of moisture appears in her eyes. Her voice softens. "Monk, let go of me." Her voice is too soft and sweet, like a spoiled child. Ning Chen's fingers pauses, but he doesn't let go. Instead, he leans down and does what he wanted to do the most when the desire in his heart first arose. He lowers his eyelashes slightly, covers his thin lips, and kisses her. This kiss is not gentle. It's a kind of paranoid possessiveness, even rough. In the endless darkness, the girl lies under him. The youth who has never made a mistake and restrained himself reveals his ferocious antennae for the first time. He pinches her wrist and does something to her that he would not do normally. Wei Wei Bai only thinks, is this a stone blooming? No, this stone is not only blooming. This stone is about to take off its clothes. Of course, it doesn't take off its clothes in the end. Just when she thinks that it's going to be cooked, the youth on top of her is suddenly stunned. His face was cold and paranoid just now, but now it's incomparably pale, as if he can't believe what he did. His eyes are a little confused. On his pale face, only the cinnabar between his eyebrows and the red on his thin lips are unusually conspicuous. He slowly raises his hand, and the Buddha beads suddenly fall. They come to her side. Then the youth's voice trembles. The encirclement formed by these beads can protect you. Don't come out. Then he releases her wrist and leaves the bed. When Wei Wei Bai gets up, she sees that Ning Chun has already walked out, and the darkness also follows his footsteps bit by bit, firmly following him out. In the end, the meditation room returns to its original state. The dark hell just now. It has disappeared. Wei Wei Bai sat on the bed and looked at the prayer beads floating around her. She extended her finger and tapped on one of the prayer beads. However, the prayer beads did not move. Instead, they emitted a gentle force, preventing her from touching them. It was like its owner, hard to get close to. Wei Wei Bai rested her face on her hands and pondered calmly for a moment. What's wrong with this stone monk? Did you lose control of your emotions? After thinking for a long time, apart from going out to kill people recently, there was nothing else that could make Monk Ning suspicious. But every time he went out to harvest the spiritual essence, she was certain that Monk Ning was not around. Although the system couldn't detect what the target was doing right now, it didn't know what to do. In fact, he couldn't even sense its location from a distance. However, if it was nearby, the system would definitely be able to sense it. Moreover, Monk Ning shouldn't have reacted this way when she killed someone. Instead, he would use an alms bowl to lock her up and recite scriptures day and night to purify her mind. Instead of looking like this, jealous? What was there to be jealous of? Could it be that there was an unknown handsome admirer around her? If Monk Ning knew, did he think that she had an affair with that unknown admirer? Wei Wei Bai, I have an admirer? The system flipped through the information. Yes, there are a few toad spirits on the side of the road who like you very much. They think that you look good. Wei Wei Bai, // Chapter 2988. After Monk Ning lost control once, he shut himself in the demon-subduing tower again. Wei Wei Bai went to see him, but found that the door was closed, and there was a barrier around the tower. A demon couldn't step over it. She shouted at Monk Ning a few times in front of the door, but there was no response. At first, Wei Wei Bai thought that Monk Ning would only be in seclusion for a day or two. She didn't pay much attention to it, until half a month passed. He was actually guarding the pagoda to the death. It seemed that the outbreak of the inner demon gave Ning Chun a terrible sense of crisis. Wei Wei Bai speculated that Ning Chun probably wouldn't forgive her for molesting him. Therefore, he had to shut himself in until his 6 senses were pure and the 4 elements were empty before he dared to step out of the tower. During this period of time, he might be able to complete the side mission completely. Bai Wei Wei pondered as she continued to jump around outside the tower. During this period of time, she shouted outside the tower every day. After all, she had to let Ning Chun know that she missed him, so he shouldn't think that the 4 elements were empty. Wei Wei Bai held a loudspeaker made of lotus leaves and shouted, "Monk Ning, don't think about running away. I might have your little bald donkey in my stomach. When are you going to run away? Get down here and take responsibility, you scumbag who runs away after eating." That was how she shouted. She wanted the 4 elements to be empty and the 6 senses to be pure. It was too late. She was his inner demon, and she was determined to rely on him. Don't try to shake her off. Continue to live your peaceful life. Wei Wei Bai continued to shout, "Monk Ning, you've already broken your precepts by doing that to me. You still have the face to stay in the temple? If you're a man, come out and return to the secular world and marry me." There was already a circle of monks around her. Most of them were eminent monks of Buddhism. After all, the monks in Wan Yuan Temple were the elites of the most powerful Buddhist cultivation. They watched as a demon spouted such filthy words to the leader of Buddhism every day. Their hands itched to beat her to death. But every time they wanted to do it, they would look at those Buddhist beads. The life pearl of the abbot was floating around her. Was there really something going on? Monk Ning told her to learn from the old turtle. In the end, he turned into a turtle first. Wei Wei Bai had been shouting outside the pagoda for half a month, and his reputation had spread far and wide. He looked at the unwavering favorability. Wei Wei Bai rubbed his chin and nodded in satisfaction. And the favorability didn't drop at all. This means that Monk Ning's 6 roots are still not clean. I'm still his inner demon. That was why she could complete the side mission without worry. She had a feeling that Monk Ning would not deny his feelings after coming out of seclusion this time. If he could deny it, her favorable impression of him wasn't that strong. Furthermore, Even after being in seclusion for so long, he still couldn't get rid of this inner demon. At that time, he could only give up and obediently increase his favorability. Wei Wei Bai calculated the strategy clearly. Then, she finally left the pagoda and walked out of the temple. Ning Chen's natal Buddha beads did not follow. Because Ning Chen was in the pagoda, the Buddha beads wouldn't follow him. The system had already detected the bandit base, and most of the remaining bandits had returned. If she collected all of them, she would be able to collect 100 beads. Wei Wei Bai thought that it was better to complete this annoying task before Monk Ning left the pagoda. And when she left the protection circle of the Buddha beads and walked out of the temple, the young man sitting in the demon's subduing tower suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep. He slowly looked at the door and pursed his thin lips. Left. Ning Chun looked at the door silently for a long time. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2989. Finally, he got up and walked out step by step. The black shadow behind him also followed his footsteps and spread out. It was like a moving hell, hiding in his shadow, waiting to devour people. Wei Wei Bai took out a handkerchief to wipe her fingers, then listened to the system take out a calculator and calculate. 99, still missing 1. She raised her eyebrows. Is there anyone else here? Those innocent victims who were locked in the dungeon didn't count. She was talking about robbers. The system took out its binoculars and looked around. Yes, there's one more, in the northeast corner. Wei Wei Bai immediately walked forward with light steps. She smiled and walked through the hall full of corpses as if she was taking a stroll. The corpses were all dried up. They were scattered all over the place like specimens. The beautiful and perfect girl didn't even lower her head, like the corpses beside her feet. They were just stones that she didn't need to care about. She walked to the northeast corner, but she heard a woman scream. Wei Wei Bai immediately kicked open the door and saw a bed and a robber who was plotting against a woman. Wei Wei Bai felt that this robber was simply polluting her eyes. She moved her finger, although it was just a weak little demon. It was more than enough to deal with an ordinary person. A chair smashed into the robber's back. The robber let out a scream and fell down. The woman who was almost insulted also got up from the bed in horror. Then she glanced at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Let's go. The woman immediately looked at her gratefully, then immediately ran out. The robber got up with difficulty and saw the person standing at the door. The girl's graceful and slender figure was bathed in the light. Her face was bright. Her eyes were sparkling, and her snow-white skin was beautiful and flawless. The robber was stunned for a moment. He moved his lips and said, "Fairy." Wei Wei Bai walked in front of him, took out a handkerchief and wiped her hands in disgust. Then she took off the dark essence on his head through the handkerchief. The bandit immediately turned into a shriveled corpse. Wei Wei Bai said disdainfully, "Sigh, being praised by an ugly person makes me feel cheap." After she finished speaking, she heard the sound of a side mission notification. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the side mission. Wei Wei Bai felt that the disfigurement knife on her head was finally gone. But in the next second, she heard it. It was the sound of thunder. This was a familiar feeling. She immediately walked out of the house. Sure enough, she saw dark clouds gathering above the roof. The lightning was like a dragon, faintly discernible in the dark clouds, exceptionally horrifying. Wei Wei Bai narrows her eyes. This is not the world of immortal cultivation. Why would there be signs of tribulation? The system suddenly frowned. You've violated the heavenly Tao's rules. The greatest rule of this plane was the heavenly Tao. Wei Wei Bai was now a stowaway. Her body was the key to her entry, but it was destroyed by the side task. He was forced to use the lotus as her body. If it was any other day, they would have no problem keeping a low profile. After all, the heavenly Tao couldn't just observe whether the ants on the ground had the same color. But she didn't expect that the side mission would be waiting here. 100 lives. No matter if it was a bad life or a good life. As a stowaway, once they violated the law of human life, they would be involved in a sin debt, And once they were burdened with a sin debt, in the eyes of the heavenly Tao, this ant would be like a light bulb that would shine. She didn't expect that a random mission could randomly give out such a danger. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 2990. Wei Wei Bai was confused. How did I get into trouble with this thing? Other people don't get struck to death even after killing a bunch of people. Was she that lucky? She killed 100 bad guys and was targeted by the heavenly axiom. The heavenly axiom was too idle. The system coughed guiltily. Maybe it's the sinister purpose of the side quest, which is to put you in danger. I said that the side quest is not a good thing. Wei Wei Bai said, the side quest is so vicious. Why don't we take out some life points and hire an assassin to kill it? The side quest was to dig a hole. It was definitely unprepared. It was not safe to let it dig a hole, so it was better to let it go and never come back. The system hesitated, then said, an assassin is quite expensive, more than 100,000 life points. Wei Wei Bai said, forget it. How can a kind person like me do that? Is there anywhere to hide from this lightning strike? The system said, why don't you go back to the house and hide? Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What it meant was that there was no place to hide. Such a big lightning dragon, the house was directly torn apart by the lightning, so there was no place to hide. Although she knew it was useless, Wei Wei Bai still returned to the house. Out of sight, out of mind. If she was struck to death, her soul would be stuck here. When the time came, she could use the female ghost to harass Monk Ning, and his favorability would still increase. After all, Monk Ning was so skilled, he could not even see a female ghost. Bai Weiwei found joy in the midst of bitterness and thought about the future. But she heard the system's reminder, Monk, no, the male lead is here. Weiwei Bai raised her eyebrows. Why did he suddenly come out of the tower and find her here? Oh right, she had one of his life pearls on her. If he deliberately looked for it, of course he could locate her. The heavenly axiom wanted to strike her to death. Maybe I can get some sympathy points. Bai Weiwei had just adjusted her state and was about to show a delicate and pitiful expression. A pear blossom with tears, a bit of strength in fear, stubbornness in strength, and a fragile beauty. The door suddenly opened. The youth's fingers rested on the door. He was wearing a white monk's robe, and the patterns on his robe were faintly glowing. His gaze was deep as it landed on her body. It happened so fast that Weiwei Bai's expression froze for a moment. Then, she immediately omitted all other emotions, leaving only a bewildered expression. Ning Chun walked all the way. They had seen many corpses. The corpses all had their essence sucked out. When he saw that the corpses were all wearing clothes, he didn't feel disgusted. It was just that she didn't rely on that method to absorb spiritual essence to relax. Then he saw the lightning strike of the heavenly Tao appear. It had been a long time since something like this had happened. Normally, such a punishment would only occur when there was an evil and uncontrollable demon. Or, if an eminent monk were to enter the demonic path, it would also cause such a phenomenon. Ning Chun lowered his eyes in silence. This was directed at the little lotus fairy. How many people had she eaten? That's why heaven's punishment was triggered? This punishment caused her soul to scatter and her body to be destroyed. The young lady in the room had a confused look on her face, as if she didn't know what kind of trouble she had caused. Ning Chun sighed faintly and slowly walked over. Just as he was about to say something, he saw that not far behind her, a corpse was upside down. That corpse was disheveled. He looked at it silently for a while, then slowly raised his eyes. His pitch-black eyes became deep and icy cold. The young lady had already pounced over. She hugged his neck with both hands, almost hiding in his body. Her face was pressed against his neck, and her breathing was disorderly. Chapter 2991. Monk, I'm scared. Ning Chun stood there quietly. Finally, the first bolt of lightning split open the roof, and the black clouds accumulated and pressed down. The surroundings were shrouded in violent darkness. The girl in his arms trembled even more. Ning Chun half closed his eyes. Then, he finally reached out and hugged her waist, whispering, "How did you get into such a big trouble?" Wei Wei Bai didn't hear the sound of the favorability decreasing. She was very relieved and rubbed against him. "I was wrong, monk. I won't do it again." This kind of casual way of apologizing. It was not sincere at all. The girl's voice even had a trace of lazy sweetness. It was as if she thought that if she apologized, there would be idiots who would always forgive her and be willing to be controlled by her. Ning Chun saw the faint appearance of the lightning dragon in the sky, but it didn't fall again. He hugged her and slowly walked out. When he walked out of the door, he coldly turned back and looked at the disheveled corpse. From his back, a black shadow flowed out and wrapped around the corpse. The corpse immediately turned into ashes and was blown away by the wind. The young man looked on indifferently. The girl in his arms was still cute and soft as she muttered, "Monk, why is the sky suddenly dark? Those lightning bolts look so scary." Ning Chun quietly lowered his eyes. After a long time, he sighed. "That's heaven's punishment. Don't leave me. I was born with a Buddha's bone and I'm very blessed. Heaven's punishment won't fall around me." The girl softly rubbed against him and said with a smile, "Monk, you're so powerful." Ning Chen's footsteps paused. His eyes were cold, but his thin red lips were slightly curved, revealing a trace of self-deprecating smile. "Really?" The girl innocently nodded. "Of course. I like you the most." Ning Chen's self-deprecating smile deepened. He finally said indifferently, "As a demon, your charm skill is really perfect." Did she say the same thing to the other man just now? After absorbing so many people's essence, she wanted to have fun, so she played with the disheveled man and sucked him dry? Otherwise, how could she explain it? There was another man in the room who was barely dressed? Wei Wei Bai felt that there was something wrong with Monk Ning's tone. She thought about it again. Apart from absorbing too many people's spiritual essence, she had attracted divine punishment. She shouldn't have done anything out of line. Or the corpse in the room was not properly dressed and caused a misunderstanding? There couldn't be such a stupid misunderstanding, right? It was obvious that the corpse was an ugly monster. In Monk Ning's eyes, she was not low enough to make a move on such a person. So, what was he angry about? Recently, Monk Ning was really hard to understand. Sure enough, once the old seaman opened the door of love, he would be as pretentious as a Chinibu. Ning Chun carried Wei Wei Bai all the way, and the lightning dragons also followed him all the way. They gradually dispersed. The sky was clear again. Wei Wei Bai was still in awe of the abilities of the proud son of heaven. Then, he was carried into the demon-subduing tower by Ning Chun. The door closed by itself. She was practically carried in by him all the way. By the time she realized what Monk Ning was doing, Ning Chun expressionlessly took out a pair of leg cuffs and handcuffed her. She sat on the ground and looked up at him blankly. Ning Chun stood in front of her and looked at her coldly. His eyes were cold and his eyebrows were enchanting. "Let's start." His voice was calm, but there was an unusually dangerous hoarseness in it. Wei Wei Bai was confused. "Start what?" The young man in front of her stared at her blank eyes and suddenly chuckled. Then he bent down and gently lifted her chin with his fingers. There was a trace of cold laughter in his voice. "Don't you like me the most? You can start seducing me." At this point he paused. Then he slowly said, "Just like how you seduce those men." By Wei Wei, at the crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download. Read the full text. 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 Chapter 2992. She wasn't stunned on purpose, but Monk Ning suddenly became abnormal. She was a little surprised. It was rare to find an honest target, but he also went crazy. Wei Wei Bai blinked and looked at him innocently. A weak mist appeared in her eyes. "Monk, what's wrong with you? Did you lose control again?" She didn't seem to understand his words. She didn't even understand that he could hurt her now. Ning Chun looked up coldly. His delicate snow-white jaw slightly tightened. He stared at her for a long time with an expressionless face, then said softly, "Do you know? Only demons who have committed heinous crimes can trigger heavenly punishment. As a demon, your strength is weak, so you need a lot of essence to cultivate. I understand." She looked at him blankly, a trace of panic finally appearing in her clear eyes. She immediately explained, "Monk, I didn't want their essence. They were bad people, I couldn't stand them, so I killed them. Look at me, I don't have the smell of essence on me." The system said that it was impossible for essence to have a smell when it was thrown into the box. She felt that she didn't have the smell of death on her. So Wei Wei Bai stretched out her slender fingers and gently touched his face. Like a soft plant, she slowly wrapped her arms around his neck. Her whole body leaned against him. The girl's fragrant and slightly moist breath made Ning Chen's breath stop. She leaned against him and said slowly, "Monk, I didn't kill people for cultivation. Those were bad people, I didn't do anything wrong." The girl's voice was soft and sweet, like the most poisonous candy. It made people willing to swallow it. It even tasted delicious. Ning Chen's eyes were dark and gloomy. He looked at her silently, as if he was waiting for something. Wei Wei Bai just hugged him and looked at him anxiously. After a moment of silence, Ning Chan said indifferently, "Is that it?" Wei Wei Bai felt that her explanation was okay. After all, if she really absorbed so many human lives, how could she be so weak? Monk was an expert in this field. It was impossible for him not to see how much strength she had. She couldn't possibly be blinded by a toad and be stubborn to the end and insist on framing her. So she turned her eyes, pursed her lips, and shook her head blankly. "What else do you want? Monk, I only killed a few bad guys, why are you so angry?" At this point, her eyes lit up and a trace of anger appeared on her face. "That heavenly punishment has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything and it came by itself. You can't blame me for this." She was used to being a jerk in this plane. His tone was so childish. If the words were too wise and clear, Monk Ning would probably suspect that she was possessed by some kind of demon. So after she finished speaking, she gently rubbed his cheek, as innocent as a child. "Monk, you have to hug me properly. I can't stand the heavenly punishment." Ning Chun lowered his eyes, his expression as cold as snow. He raised his hand and gently placed it on her wrist. Then he forcefully pinched her wrist. She immediately frowned in pain and was about to complain. Slowly but firmly, he pressed her to the ground. He looked down expressionlessly. His beautiful fingers pinched her wrist to the cold and hard ground. When the youth did all this, he seemed too elegant and slow. There was not a trace of rashness under impulse. It was like when he was chanting scriptures or holding a Dharma assembly. The rhythm was slow and steady. When Wei Wei Bai realized something, the youth had already bent down and kissed her. She flinched, wanting to avoid this kiss that was too strong. Chapter 2993. However, she saw the young man slowly raise his face. His eyes were still cold, but there were dangerous blood vessels hidden in the depths of his eyes. The cold and holy young man's clothes were a little messy at this moment. His thin lips were moist, and his thick and exquisite eyelashes were drooping lightly. There was a hint of evil in his beauty. Do you like to pretend to be obedient when you are having fun with others? What was divine punishment? He knew best. She had never been pure and innocent. She was not even a good demon. Instead, she was vicious, full of filth, and ruthless. She had at least tens of thousands of lives in her hands, or she had made some vicious mistakes that could not be tolerated by the heavens. That was why she had attracted this punishment. Ning Chun stretched out his slender fingers and gently hooked her clothes. His voice was low and steady. "Your body is a lotus and you grew up in the spirit pool. You shouldn't have made such a big mistake. Besides, it's impossible for you to make such a big mistake with tens of thousands of lives by my side, and there's no time. The voice of reason. In the empty demon-subduing tower, the beautiful and abstinent young man slowly stretched out his pale fingers and did something forbidden. Dark shadows gradually enveloped the tower. In the past, there were countless great demons locked here. But now, it was filled with a dark hell that spread out from the young man's heart. His breath was a little uncontrollably heavy, but his tone was still indifferent. So it's a foreign great demon that entered the weak lotus? Soul possession or life-seizing. It was a word unique to this plane. If a great demon was able to use its power to attach its remaining soul to another creature before it died, then the great demon would be able to do so. And life-seizing was when there was another life in that body when it was attached. Kill that life and then occupy the body. It was like possession. However, there were no immortal cultivators here, so the name was different. As soon as Ning Chen finished speaking, he saw the weak demon under him widening her eyes slightly. Monk, what are you talking about? If you want to take advantage of me, so be it. How can you accuse me wrongly? I'm a lotus spirit. Have you seen me turn into a lotus? The most beautiful flower in the world. At this point, she sneered. Who can be more beautiful than me? Are other people's flowers as delicate and beautiful as me? The young man was silent for a while before he slowly guessed. It's a demon that loves beauty. Let me guess, what kind of demon are you? He removed her belt with his fingertips. His eyes darkened. Is it a vixen? Wei Weibai saw that his actions were becoming more and more abnormal and immediately said, Monk, what's wrong with you? Wake up, you're being controlled by the darkness again. Ning Chun turned a deaf ear to him. The belt fell off from his snow-white fingertips. Or daffodils? His tone was calm. His movements became rough, as if he wanted to crush her into pieces. Wei Weibai finally started to fight back, but one of her hands was held in place by him, while the other was hitting him with all her might. He was as hard as a rock. Her strength was in his eyes. Too weak. Was this also the reason why she immediately absorbed the life force of the humans after possessing them? No wonder he was unwilling to recite and cultivate. Of course he was unwilling. Before possessing a lotus, he must have been a great demon. A demon that had tasted a human would not turn back, and could not be saved. She could possess him again because of heaven's punishment. Wei Weibai felt that Monk Ning was possessed. Why did he suddenly think that she was possessed? Alright, although it was true. But the system's technology would not be so bad that it would be found out that she was an outsider. In the past, there were no big shots who could see through the high-end immortal cultivation world. Chapter 2994. It was impossible for Monk Ning to see through it with his sharp eyes. So she frowned and tears appeared in her eyes. She said fiercely, Monk Ning, don't talk nonsense. Who's taking your life? If your brain isn't clear, go take a bath. Don't accuse people wrongly. Ning Chen's movements paused slightly. Then he curled his lips and sneered. A Buddhist bead flew from the string of beads. It floated above them. Ning Chen's tone was calm, but there was a hint of suppressed excitement. This Buddhist bead contains the experience of the past abbot of Wan Yuan Temple. It's used for investigation. The Buddhist bead emitted a faint white light. In the hazy light, the youth said softly, Look, your body is an ordinary lotus. Without an outsider controlling it, it's impossible for it to become a demon. He had never doubted it. He had never thought of using this to examine her, until he realized that she was hiding something. She began to kill people and even heavenly punishment appeared. Wei Weibai looked up. Hot dog. In the white light, a pile of information about her lotus body appeared. It was ancient language and it took a lot of effort to translate. A few hundred words of summary. It was impossible for her lotus to become a demon. There were no conditions, no reason, and not enough time. It was completely immature. It was just an ordinary lotus. Since lotus flowers couldn't become demons. But if they did, wouldn't they be possessed by an outsider? You've screwed up everything. The target of this plane's attack, the Buddhist bead in her hand, were it a gift? How could it be so heaven-defying? Wei Bai felt that her face was a little swollen from the slap, but it was fine. She was thick-skinned and could still bear it. So she pinched his cheek hard with her fingers. Let go of me. I don't know what you're talking about. I was a lotus spirit when I woke up. If you say I'm not, then what am I? You're mistaken, monk. Ning Chun looked at her indifferently for a long time, as if he wanted to see if she was lying. But after looking at her quietly for a while, he sighed softly. At this time, you're still thinking of seducing me. Her eyes were blurred, and her delicate face was full of excitement. Even if she was just looking at him, she could instantly seduce him. Wei Bai, Ning Chun calmly said, there's no need to tempt me. I've already... His words were muffled on her lips. I've fallen. Wei Bai, just speak. Don't get agitated. Stop. Couldn't he explain clearly before continuing? What's the hurry? Inside the dark tower, the youth would occasionally sigh softly and whisper, don't run. You can't escape from this place. Then the girl said something vaguely. Soon the sound disappeared. Darkness spread out endlessly. It was like hell, but also like heaven. Wei Bai felt that she was not a lotus spirit, but a dried salted vegetable. She spent a lot of effort to explain, but all she got in return was Monk Ning's even more terrifying means. Normally, an honest person would be inhumane when he went berserk. And he was stubborn. In the beginning, when he didn't accept it, he wouldn't be swayed no matter how high his favorability was. Once he started to do something, no matter how she rejected him, he would not budge. They would only be more single-minded in reclaiming the land. She curled up in a corner, the chains on her slender ankles falling heavily to the ground. The girl hugged herself and rested her head on her knees. Her ink-black hair was scattered all over her fair body. She was so enchanting and pure that it was soul-stirring. Even the traces of damage on the corners of her lips were so seductive that it made one's heart tighten. He was willing to become her servant. The youth stretched out his fingers and took his monk's robe. The wide male robe draped over her body. Chapter 29:95. The girl, however, cowered and retreated backwards. Ning Chun reached out and grabbed her shoulder. His strength was still a little rough. He lowered his head and approached her. His breath was still unstable. Don't hide from me. This is very simple for you, isn't it? The young man's tone was light, but it contained a cold hatred. Your every move was born to charm. In the land of darkness, there are indeed charming demons like you. They are all masters who bring disaster to countries and people. As he spoke, he slowly stretched out his finger and gently touched her back. After you possessed the lotus to get more power, you targeted me as your target. Possession, seduction, target. Cough cough, it was all right. But she was not a demon, but a human with a system. Thinking about it this way, the system was actually very similar to a demon. Monk Ning was too smart. Almost all of his guesses were correct. This made Wei Bai have to gather her emotions and suppress what little conscience she had left when she wanted to refute. Only then could she raise her head confidently and smile coldly. Monk, so what if I seduce you? I like you. Can't I seduce you? When have you ever seen me bring disaster to countries and people? Is this what you wronged me for? Speaking of this, her face and eyes turned red. She felt very wronged. I am a lotus spirit. You wronged me. You are a bad person. Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something. She stretched out her fingertips and emitted a weak, purifying power. Are you being controlled? Her fingers were held by him. The young man's breath was entangled. His thin lips kissed her lips. Then his voice was calm. Didn't I tell you? Wei Bai was confused. The young man's voice lowered. It was never these things that controlled me. It was me who indulged and controlled them. He was born with a Buddhist bone. From the day he was touched by darkness. Condensed. In the end, it condensed into a dark hell. But the Buddhist bone was only touched. It was not contaminated. The purity of the Buddhist bone was still there, but it was covered with darkness. As long as he did not indulge himself, the darkness could not control him. And if he indulged, then he would not lose his mind because this was what he wanted to do in the first place. What control was there to talk about? He was just following his heart. The young man's voice was soft and slow, as if he was chanting scriptures. You seduced me, and I was seduced. At this point, he smiled faintly. It's a pity that I'm not the same as your previous victims. They might be prey that you can casually abandon, but I'm the hunter. As he spoke, his fingertips caressed her face, sentimental and gentle. You are my prey. Once I catch you, you will either die in my hands or be locked up here for the rest of your life. Demon Subduing Tower. It was the place where he kept the demons. When he noticed that something was wrong with her, he began to purge the demons here. He would rather be wrong. He didn't want to use it here. Even if your memories are incomplete, you must have done something extremely evil before you possessed me. That's why Sky's punishment followed you. Even if you possess me, you won't be able to escape this punishment. He gently wrapped the wide robe around the girl's slender body. Possession, seduction, murder. All of these are capital crimes. Ning Chen's tone was unusually soft, as if he was patiently explaining to an ignorant child. I won't kill you, but everything has a price. You will pay with your own body, understand? Wei Bai. I won't bully an honest person anymore. When an honest person becomes perverted, he's actually so evil. Saying things like paying with your own body, he doesn't even blush at all? Ning Chen didn't care about her shocked expression at all. He slowly combed her hair, then stood up and waved his hand. So a huge and thick chain fell from the sky. It was isolated between them. Wei Bai curled up on the other side of the chain wall. Ning Chen calmly stood there. He slowly said, I'll go make you a pastry. If you like this, or if you like a soft blanket or pillow, I'll bring it for you. Wei Bai was dumbfounded. The young man had already turned around and walked out step by step. When the door opened, sunlight spilled in, but it couldn't shine on the other side of the chain wall. The girl curled up in the darkness, looking exceptionally fragile and pitiful. She reached out and grabbed the thick chain in front of her. Her voice trembled. Monk, you're going to lock me up here. Ning Chen's footsteps paused. He nodded indifferently. Yes, you'll be here before I die. Wei Bai's face was pale. She finally couldn't suppress her anger. You're crazy. I didn't do anything heartless. Those I killed were all bad people. You can't do this to me. Ning Chen was silent for a while. Then he turned his head and revealed a smile. Your biggest crime was never this, but seducing me. The door slowly closed. The young man's calm voice sounded in the pagoda. And it succeeded. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. // transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. The is at https://m. Sashu. Calm the button at the bottom to record this chapter. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like Transmigration system, male god, come here, comma. Chapter 2996. The door slammed shut. Wei Bai returned to normal from her pitiful state. She touched her face and sighed in self-pity. It was such a beautiful mistake that it drove an honest person crazy. Monk Ning was the typical honest and shy type. In the end, she went overboard and drove him to such a neurotic state. The system was confused. What's wrong? What happened? Why was the screen blocked for so long this time? I thought you were struck by lightning and your body turned into a mosaic. It was blocked because it involved blood and violence. Then he finally saw his surroundings clearly. This was a wall made of iron chains. And the cuffs on the host's ankles? Even the familiar and beautiful white monk's robe on the host. He thought of something. The system said, "You are." The host was calm. "Don't mention it. If you mention it, I'll block it." The system understood. Oh, I know. Then the host and the system fell into deep silence. Finally, the system said, "Let's play the game." Wei Wei Bai said, "Okay. This time I must eat that gold coin." Then the system and the host happily played the difficult version of Super Mario together. As for being imprisoned, blackened, and sick, what was there to be excited about? It was such a normal thing, just treat it like eating, drinking, and breathing. When Ning Chun came back with the food box, he saw Wei Wei Bai curled up in a corner. She was wearing the clothes he gave her and was in a daze. He moved his finger and the wall of chains automatically separated and retreated into the darkness. Bai Weiwei was in the middle of playing games with the system. The most difficult gold coin to eat was about to be in her hands. Suddenly, a hand gently stroked her hair. "Damn it, don't touch her gold coin." Weiwei Bai waved her hand expressionlessly and slapped that annoying hand away. With this distraction, the gold coin was gone. She even fell into a trap and died. Weiwei Bai's eyes dimmed. She slowly raised her dead fish eyes and saw Ning Chen's finger stopped in midair. He stared at her indifferently. He seemed to be unable to react. Only then did Weiwei Bai remember that she was imprisoned. Then, the look in her eyes became even more lifeless. He couldn't let the monk think that his imprisonment was ineffective. What if he had a mental breakdown and finally abandoned everything? Finally falling into the darkness and locking her in here. In exchange, she played the game happily. Ning Piao was probably going to break down again. Therefore, Weiwei Bai quietly shrank back with a look of resistance. Ning Chun was silent for a while, but she didn't have much of a reaction. Instead, she took the food box away and took out her favorite pastries. Her body didn't need food. These pastries were just to satisfy their cravings. What she needed was spirit energy. And the thing that the demon-subduing tower lacked the most was spiritual energy. It had only been a short while, but her face was already somewhat haggard and pale, making her look even more pitiful. Ning Chun picked up a small piece of pastry and brought it to her lips. "Eat some." Weiwei Bai pursed her lips. With a dark expression, she turned her face away and ignored him. She even snorted coldly to express her disdain. However, in the next second, her chin was pinched and she was forced to turn around. The piece of pastry was already stuffed into her mouth. He said indifferently, "I made it with the best spiritual herbs. There's no harm in eating more." However, this pitiful amount of spiritual energy didn't have any practical replenishment. It only allowed her to maintain her human form. She couldn't use half of her strength. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.